My name is Darius Thompson, and I'm 17 years old. I live in a small town called Millbrook, Georgia, population about 8,000, give or take a few hundred depending on the season. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and if they don't know you, they know your mama, your grandmama, or at least somebody who went to school with one of your cousins. The town sits right off Highway 41, nestled between fields of peanuts and pecan groves that stretch as far as the eye can see. There's one main street, appropriately called Main Street, with a few local businesses that have been around longer than I've been alive. There's Henderson's Hardware, which has been run by the Henderson family since 1952, Miller's Diner, where the coffee is always hot and the gossip is always hotter, a small library that doubles as the community center on Thursdays, and a gas station that's seen better days but somehow keeps chugging along. I live with my mama in a small house on the east side of town, the side where most of the black families settled decades ago when segregation was still the law of the land. The house is nothing fancy, just a modest two-bedroom with peeling paint on the shutters and a front porch that creaks something awful when you walk across it, but it's home. My mama, Lorraine Thompson, works two jobs to keep us afloat. During the day, she cleans houses for some of the wealthier families on the west side of town, the side with the big Victorian homes and manicured lawns and gardens that look like they belong in magazines. At night, 3 times a week, she works the evening shift at Miller's Diner, serving coffee and pie to the late-night crowd. I've watched her come home bone-tired more times than I can count, her feet swollen and her back aching, but she never complains. She just kisses my forehead, asks about my homework, and tells me to make sure I'm working hard in school because education is the only ticket out of here. My daddy left when I was 6 years old. I don't remember much about him except the sound of his laugh and the way he used to lift me up on his shoulders like I weighed nothing at all. One day he was there and the next day he wasn't. Mama never talks about him much, and I learned early on not to ask. All she ever said was that some men aren't built for the long haul, and we were better off without someone who didn't want to stick around. I believed her mostly because I had to. What choice did a 6-year-old have? But sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd wonder what I did wrong, what made him decide that I wasn't worth staying for. Those thoughts would eat at me until I'd finally drift off into an uneasy sleep filled with dreams I could never quite remember when I woke up. School is okay, I guess. I'm a senior at Millbrook High, which is the only high school in town, so everybody from every background ends up there together. The building itself is old, built sometime in the 70s with that industrial brick and narrow windows that make it feel more like a prison than a place of learning. The paint in the hallways is that institutional beige that seems designed to drain any joy out of the atmosphere, and the lockers are dented and covered with layers upon layers of stickers and graffiti that the janitors have long since given up trying to remove. I'm not the most popular kid, not by a long shot, but I'm not a complete outcast either. I've got a few friends, mostly other black kids who understand what it's like to navigate a town like this, a place where the old divisions might not be written into law anymore but are still carved deep into the social landscape. There's Marcus, who's been my best friend since 3rd grade when he shared his lunch with me after I forgot mine at home. There's Jamal, who's got dreams of playing college basketball even though he's only about 5'9" and our team hasn't won a championship in over a decade. And there's Sierra, who's smart as a whip and plans to get a full ride to college and become a lawyer so she can come back and fight for people who can't fight for themselves. I'm not exceptional at anything in particular. My grades are decent, mostly B's with the occasional A when I really apply myself, and a C here and there in subjects that just don't click no matter how hard I try. I'm not an athlete, though I'm in okay shape from working part-time jobs that keep me on my feet. I'm not in the band or the drama club or any of the other extracurriculars that look good on college applications. I'm just Darius, a quiet kid who keeps his head down, does his work, and tries not to cause trouble. My mama always says that's the safest way to be, especially for a young black man in a town like this. Don't give them any reason to notice you, she says. Don't give them any excuse. But there's one thing I am good at, and that's fixing things. I don't know where I got it from, maybe some latent gene from my daddy's side that I'll never be able to confirm, but I've always had a knack for understanding how things work. When I was little, I used to take apart old radios and toasters that Mama would bring home from yard sales, spreading the pieces out on the kitchen table and studying them like they held the secrets of the universe. She'd shake her head and tell me I was making a mess, but she never stopped me. By the time I was 12, I could fix just about any small appliance in the house. By 14, I'd moved on to bigger projects, helping neighbors with their lawnmowers and bicycles and even the occasional car problem. Word got around that Darius Thompson could fix things, and people started coming to me with their broken-down equipment and mechanical mysteries. I started working at Henderson's Hardware when I was 15. Mr. Henderson, a gruff old white man with a perpetual scowl and hands like leather, hired me to help stock shelves and sweep floors. But it didn't take long before he realized I had a talent for more than just manual labor. He started teaching me about tools, about different types of screws and bolts, and the proper way to use a torque wrench. He showed me how to mix paint and cut lumber and thread pipe, skills that felt valuable in a way that algebraic equations and historical dates never quite did. I think Mr. Henderson saw something in me, though he'd never say it out loud. He's not the warm and fuzzy type, but every now and then he'd grunt his approval when I did something right, and that was enough. I work at the hardware store every day after school and most Saturdays, earning minimum wage that I split with Mama to help cover the bills. It's not glamorous work and it doesn't pay much, but it's honest and it keeps me busy and it's teaching me skills that I know will serve me well no matter where life takes me. The store itself smells like sawdust and motor oil, and that particular metallic scent that comes from bins full of nails and screws. The wooden floors are worn smooth from decades of foot traffic, and the fluorescent lights overhead flicker just enough to be annoying but not enough to warrant replacement. There's a certain comfort in the routine of it, in knowing exactly where everything is and how everything works. The west side of Millbrook is a different world entirely. That's where the money lives, in houses that could swallow up 10 of mine without breaking a sweat. Wide streets lined with oak trees that were planted 100 years ago, their branches forming canopies that dapple the sidewalks with shifting patterns of light and shadow. The lawns are emerald green even in the height of summer, maintained by professional landscaping crews who show up like clockwork every week. The houses themselves are grand. Some of them antebellum mansions that have been in the same families for generations. Others newer constructions designed to mimic that old Southern elegance with their columns and wraparound porches and French windows. This is where my mama works during the day, cleaning bathrooms and dusting furniture and making beds for people who will never know her name even though she knows every intimate detail of their lives. I've been to the West Side plenty of times, usually to pick up Mama after work or to help her carry cleaning supplies when her car is acting up. The people there look at me differently than they look at each other. It's not always outright hostility, though sometimes it is, but more often it's a kind of studied indifference, like I'm part of the scenery, as forgettable as the mailbox or the fire hydrant. Some of them are polite in that carefully controlled Southern way, offering tight smiles and brief nods before quickly looking away. Others don't bother with even that minimal courtesy. I've learned to make myself small in those spaces, to avoid eye contact, to speak only when spoken to be as non-threatening and invisible as possible. It's exhausting, but it's necessary. There's a social hierarchy in Millbrook that everyone understands even if no one talks about it directly. At the top are the old money families, the ones whose ancestors built this town on the backs of enslaved people, and who have managed to hold onto their wealth and influence through the generations. Below them are the newer rich, people who made their money in business or real estate or sometimes through sheer luck, and who have bought their way into the West Side even if they'll never quite have the social cachet of the old families. Then there's the middle class, mostly white folks who live in the subdivisions that sprang up in the 80s and 90s, working as managers and accountants and teachers. And at the bottom, well, that's where people like me and my mama live, the working poor who keep the town running but are rarely acknowledged for it. Race is the elephant in the room that everyone pretends not to see. Millbrook has a history, the kind of history that's swept under the rug and glossed over in the official town narratives, but that everyone knows about if they've lived here long enough. There were lynchings here back in the day. There were sundown town policies that weren't officially on the books but were enforced nonetheless. There were separate schools and separate water fountains and 1,000 little indignities that were designed to remind black folks of their place. All of that is supposedly in the past, ancient history that we're meant to have moved beyond, but the truth is that the past never really goes away. It just shapeshifts, finding new forms and new expressions. The divisions aren't enforced by law anymore, but they're maintained by a complex web of social norms and economic disparities and unspoken rules that everyone learns to navigate. I've experienced racism, of course. How could I not have, growing up black in a place like this? Sometimes it's overt, like the time in ninth grade when someone spray painted a racial slur on my locker, and the administration treated it like a minor prank rather than the hate crime it was. Sometimes it's more subtle, like the way certain teachers seem to expect less of me, their voices dripping with surprise when I turn in good work, as if they'd already written me off as a lost cause. Or the way security guards follow me around the few stores in town, watching my every move like I'm about to shoplift something, even though I've never stolen anything in my life. Or the way I've been pulled over by police twice in the past year for driving while black, sitting in my mama's old sedan while officers ran my license and asked me questions designed to trip me up, their hands resting casually on their weapons while my heart hammered in my chest and I tried to remember all the rules for staying alive in these situations. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Answer politely but don't volunteer information. Yes, sir, no, sir, I understand, sir. But I've also experienced kindness, real genuine kindness from people who see me as a human being rather than a stereotype. Mr. Henderson, for all his gruffness, has been good to me. Mrs. Patterson, my English teacher, has encouraged my writing and told me I have a voice worth sharing. There's Mrs. Chen at the library who always sets aside books she thinks I might like, creating a little stack with my name on it that's waiting whenever I stop by. These moments matter, these little acts of recognition and respect, even if they don't erase the other experiences. My dreams are modest, I suppose, at least compared to what some kids my age aspire to. I'm not trying to be a doctor or a lawyer or a professional athlete. I don't have visions of fame or fortune. What I want is simpler and somehow more complicated all at once. I want to go to technical school, maybe get certified as a mechanic or an electrician, something practical that will allow me to make a decent living. I want to be able to support my mama so she doesn't have to work herself to death anymore, so she can retire someday and maybe travel a little, see some of the places she's only ever read about in magazines. I want a house of my own, nothing fancy, just a place that's mine where I can set down roots. I want to find someone to love who loves me back, to maybe have a family someday, to build something that lasts. These seem like reasonable dreams, American dreams even, the kind of things that are supposed to be attainable through hard work and determination, but sometimes I wonder if they're just fairy tales I tell myself to make the present more bearable. The thing about being young and black in America is that you're constantly aware of statistics, of percentages and probabilities that feel less like abstract numbers and more like prophecies you're supposed to fulfill. You know that you're more likely to be stopped by police, more likely to be suspended from school, more likely to be incarcerated, more likely to die young. You know that the odds are stacked against you in ways both visible and invisible, that you're going to have to work twice as hard to get half as far, that mistakes that might be forgiven or overlooked in your white peers could derail your entire life. It's a heavy knowledge to carry, especially at 17 when you're supposed to be thinking about prom and graduation and what college you're going to attend, not about survival strategies and worst-case scenarios. My mama tries to prepare me for the world without crushing my spirit entirely, a delicate balance that I'm only now beginning to appreciate. She tells me stories about her own life, about growing up in rural Mississippi in even harder times, about the indignities she endured and the strength she found. She tells me about my grandparents, who I never got to meet but who apparently were pillars of their community, people who believed in dignity and self-respect even when the world seemed designed to strip both away. She tells me that I come from survivors, from people who endured the unendurable and still found reasons to sing and laugh and love. She tells me that I carry their legacy in my bones, that I'm stronger than I know, that I have a purpose even if I haven't discovered it yet. Sometimes I believe her. Sometimes, when I'm fixing an engine and my hands know exactly what to do without my brain having to think about it, or when I'm reading a book that opens up new worlds in my mind, or when I'm sitting on the porch at dusk watching the fireflies come out and feeling connected to something larger than myself, I can feel that strength she talks about. I can believe that I'm part of an unbroken chain stretching back through generations, that I have ancestors watching over me, that my life has meaning and purpose beyond just getting through each day. But other times, when I'm lying awake at 3 in the morning worrying about money or school or the future or the thousand ways things could go wrong, that belief feels very far away, like something I'm grasping for but can't quite reach. It was a Saturday afternoon in late September when everything changed. The air had that quality it gets in the South during early fall, when summer is reluctantly releasing its grip but hasn't quite let go yet. It was warm but not oppressive, with a breeze that carried the scent of pine and the faint smell of someone burning leaves somewhere in the distance. I just finished my shift at Henderson's Hardware, 8 hours of mixing paint and helping customers find the right size of bolt, and reorganizing the lumber section after a particularly messy morning. My muscles ached in that good way that comes from honest work, and I was looking forward to going home, taking a shower and maybe catching up on some homework before Mama got back from the diner. I was walking along the shoulder of Highway 41, about 2 miles from home when I saw the car. It was pulled off to the side of the road at an awkward angle, hazard lights blinking. Even from a distance I could tell it was expensive, one of those sleek European sedans that cost more than my mama would make in 5 years. As I got closer, I could see it was a Mercedes, silver with chrome accents that caught the afternoon sun. The kind of car you saw on the west side of town, definitely not the kind of car you expected to see broken down on the side of the highway. As I approached, I could see someone standing next to the car and my steps slowed. It was a girl, probably around my age, maybe a little younger. She was white, with long blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing clothes that screamed money even to my untrained eye. Designer jeans, a silk blouse, expensive-looking sneakers that were probably worth more than my entire wardrobe. She was on her phone, pacing back and forth, and even from 20 feet away I could hear the frustration in her voice. Every instinct I had told me to keep walking. This wasn't my problem. This was a white girl with an expensive car, and she undoubtedly had AAA or some concierge service or a daddy with enough money to send help. Getting involved would likely only lead to complications, maybe even danger. I'd heard enough stories about black men being accused of things they didn't do, about good intentions being twisted into something sinister, about situations that seemed innocent turning deadly in the span of a heartbeat. My mama's voice echoed in my head, warning me to keep my head down, to not draw attention, to stay in my lane. But there was another voice too, quieter but no less insistent. It was the voice of my grandmother, who I'd never met but whose words Mama had passed down to me like precious heirlooms. Be the change you want to see in the world, she used to say. Treat others the way you'd want to be treated. Do what's right even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And beneath those noble sentiments was something simpler, something more human. This was another person who needed help, and I had the skills to potentially provide that help. How could I live with myself if I just walked past? I stopped walking and stood there for a moment, having a whole internal debate with myself that probably lasted only seconds but felt much longer. The girl hadn't noticed me yet, too absorbed in her phone conversation, which sounded increasingly heated. I could hear fragments of her side of the conversation floating across the distance between us. I don't know what happened, it just started making a weird noise and then it just stopped, she was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone used to having their problems solved by other people. How long? That's ridiculous. I can't wait 2 hours. There has to be someone closer. Check again. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the car. As I got closer, she turned and saw me, and I watched her expression change in real time. First there was relief, someone was coming to help, then confusion as she registered who I was, and then something that looked uncomfortably like fear. She took a small step back, her hand tightening on her phone, her body language shifting from open to defensive in the space of a heartbeat. I stopped about 10 feet away, making sure to keep my hands visible, making sure my body language was as non-threatening as possible. I'd learned these tricks over the years, the subtle ways of making myself smaller and safer and less intimidating to people who'd been taught to fear someone who looked like me. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice gentle and polite. "I couldn't help but notice you're having car trouble. I'm pretty good with engines. Maybe I could take a look." She stared at me for a long moment, her blue eyes assessing, calculating. I could practically see the wheels turning in her head, weighing the options, trying to decide if I was a threat or a solution. The person on the other end of her phone was still talking, their voice a tinny buzz that I couldn't make out. Hold on," she said into the phone, then lowered it slightly, though she didn't end the call. "You're a mechanic." "Not officially," I admitted, "but I work at Henderson's Hardware and I fix cars on the side. I've been working on engines since I was 12. I might be able to help." Another long moment of assessment. I stood very still, waiting, trying not to look impatient or frustrated or anything that might spook her. Finally, she seemed to come to a decision. "Okay," she said slowly. "I guess it couldn't hurt to look. The tow truck isn't going to be here for 2 hours anyway." She said something else into her phone, something I didn't catch, then ended the call and slipped it into her back pocket. She looked at me expectantly, and I realized she was waiting for me to do something. What happened exactly? I asked, moving slowly toward the front of the car. What were you experiencing before it stopped? I don't know, she said, following me but maintaining her distance. I was just driving and then there was this noise, like a grinding or something, and then the car just kind of stuttered and died. I pulled over and tried to start it again, but nothing happened. I nodded, processing this information. Did any lights come on the dashboard, any warning indicators? She thought about this. Maybe there might have been a light, I'm not really sure, I was kind of panicking. That's understandable, I said, trying to put her at ease. Do you mind if I pop the hood? Go ahead, she said, gesturing vaguely at the car. I moved to the driver's side, acutely aware of her watching my every move, and reached inside to pull the hood release. The hood popped up with a soft click, and I moved to the front of the car, lifting it all the way and propping it open with the rod. The engine bay was immaculate, everything clean and properly maintained, exactly what you'd expect from an expensive car owned by someone with money. I started with the basics, checking the oil level, looking at the belts, examining the battery connections. Everything seemed fine on the surface, but I knew that didn't mean much. The real issues with modern cars were often electronic, things that required diagnostic equipment I didn't have access to on the side of the highway. Still, there were some common problems I could check for. Can you try to start it for me? I called out to her. She hesitated, then moved to the driver's door, opening it and sliding behind the wheel. I heard the characteristic click of her turning the key, but nothing happened. No cranking, no attempt to turn over, nothing. That told me something. Okay, you can stop, I said, and she got out of the car, leaving the door open. I checked the battery terminals more carefully, and that's when I spotted it. One of the connections was loose, not dramatically so, but enough that it could cause exactly the kind of problem she described. It was a simple fix, almost embarrassingly simple, the kind of thing that would have taken a mechanic about 30 seconds to diagnose and another 30 seconds to fix. I think I found your problem, I said, straightening up. Your battery terminal is loose, it's not making proper contact, that's why the car died and won't start. It's an easy fix if you have any tools. She looked at me blankly. Tools? Like a wrench? Do you have a toolkit in the car? I have no idea, she admitted. Maybe in the trunk. I walked around to the trunk and waited for her to pop it. Inside was pristine, just like the rest of the car, with a spare tire that looked like it had never been used and a small compartment that held what looked like a factory toolkit. I pulled it out and found a wrench that would work. It took me less than 5 minutes to tighten the battery terminal. It was such a simple fix that I almost felt silly for how easy it was, but I'd learned a long time ago that sometimes the simplest solutions are the right ones. I double-checked my work, making sure everything was secure, then asked her to try starting the car again. This time when she turned the key, the engine roared to life immediately, purring smoothly like nothing had ever been wrong. The look of relief that washed over her face was almost comical, her whole body visibly relaxing, the tension draining out of her shoulders. "Oh my God," she said, her hand pressed to her chest. "You fixed it, you actually fixed it." Like I said, it was just a loose connection, I told her, closing the hood and wiping my hands on my jeans. Happens sometimes. You might want to have a mechanic check it out properly though, make sure everything else is tight and there aren't any other issues. She was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and confusion, like she couldn't quite reconcile what had just happened with whatever preconceptions she'd been carrying around. For a moment we just stood there in awkward silence, the engine running smoothly behind us, cars occasionally whooshing past on the highway. "Thank you," she finally said, and she actually sounded sincere. Really, I was totally freaking out. I have no idea what I would have done if you hadn't come along. Waited 2 hours for the tow truck, I guess, I said with a small smile, trying to lighten the mood. She laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her whole face. Yeah, and my dad would have killed me. This is his car. He doesn't even know I have it. I kind of borrowed it without asking. I raised an eyebrow at that but didn't comment. Rich people problems were outside my area of expertise or concern. Well, you should probably get it back before he notices it's gone then, I said, stepping back from the car to signal that I was done, that she was free to leave, that this brief intersection of our lives was over. Yeah, definitely, she agreed, but she didn't move toward the car. Instead, she was looking at me with that same confused expression, like she was trying to figure something out. This is probably going to sound weird, but can I ask you something? I shrugged, trying to appear casual even though my guard went up immediately. Sure. Why did you stop to help me? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, you could have just kept walking. You didn't know me, you didn't owe me anything. And she trailed off, looking uncomfortable, and I could fill in the blank she was leaving. And I'm white and you're black, and we both know the kind of danger you could have been putting yourself in by approaching me. I thought about how to answer that, about all the complex reasons and simple instincts that had led me to make that choice. Finally, I settled on the truth, or at least part of it. Because you needed help and I could help, I said simply. It's not more complicated than that. She studied my face like she was looking for something, some hidden agenda or ulterior motive. Most people wouldn't have stopped. I'm not most people, I guess. Another moment of silence, and then she seemed to make up her mind about something. She pulled out her phone and started tapping at the screen. What's your name? Darius, I told her, not offering my last name, still maintaining some boundaries even in this moment of unexpected connection. I'm Madison, she said, glancing up from her phone with a smile. Madison Whitmore, and I want to pay you for helping me. What do you charge? I don't charge anything, I said immediately, taking another step back. I was just helping out, you don't owe me anything. Don't be ridiculous, she said, her fingers still moving across her phone screen. You saved me like 2 hours of waiting and probably a huge towing fee and my dad's wrath. Let me give you something, seriously. I appreciate the offer, but I'm good, I insisted, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. Really, just glad I could help. She looked up from her phone, her expression shifting to something that looked almost like respect. You're serious. Completely serious. She shook her head, slipping her phone back into her pocket. That's rare, most people would take the money. I'm not most people, I repeated, and this time there was the tiniest edge to my voice, a reminder that I was my own person with my own values, not a character in whatever narrative she was constructing. No, she said softly, I guess you're not. She moved toward her car door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Thank you, Darius, really, you might have just saved my life today, or at least my social life, which sometimes feels like the same thing. I nodded, not sure how to respond to that. She got in the car, closing the door gently, and I stood there watching as she checked her mirrors and carefully pulled back onto the highway. She gave me a small wave as she drove past, and then she was gone, the silver Mercedes disappearing into the distance, leaving me standing on the shoulder of Highway 41 with grease on my hands and a strange feeling in my chest that I couldn't quite name. I continued my walk home, turning the encounter over in my mind. It had been such a brief interaction, maybe 15 minutes total, and yet it felt significant in a way I couldn't articulate. I'd helped someone, which should have felt good and did feel good, but there was also something unsettling about the whole thing, about her initial fear and her surprise that I'd helped without wanting payment, and the way she'd looked at me like I was some kind of puzzle to be solved. When I got home, Mama was already there, which was unusual for a Saturday afternoon. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, still wearing her work clothes from the diner, her feet propped up on another chair. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that no amount of sleep could fully cure. Hey baby, she said, looking up as I came through the door. How was work? It was fine, I said, going to the sink to wash my hands. Busy day, how about you? I thought you had the evening shift. Called in sick, she admitted, and my head snapped around to look at her because Mama never called in sick, never missed a shift unless she was literally too ill to stand. My back has been acting up something fierce all week, and Martha told me if I didn't take a day to rest, she was going to personally drag me to the doctor. Martha was Mama's supervisor at the diner, a tough-talking woman with a heart of gold who'd known my Mama for 20 years. If Martha was worried enough to insist Mama take time off, that meant things were worse than Mama was letting on. "How bad is it?" I asked, drying my hands and moving to sit across from her at the table. "Nothing I can't handle," she said, which was Mama speak for "it hurts like hell but I don't want you to worry. Just need to rest it for a day or two and I'll be good as new." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist she see a doctor, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. We didn't have health insurance, couldn't afford it, and the free clinic was only open 2 days a week and always had a waiting list a mile long. So instead, I just nodded and changed the subject, telling her about my day at the hardware store, about the customer who'd insisted on buying the wrong size of pipe despite my repeated warnings and then come back an hour later to exchange it. I didn't tell her about helping the girl on the highway. I'm not sure why. Maybe because it felt private somehow, like a moment that belonged only to me. Or maybe because I knew Mama would worry, would lecture me about the dangers of putting myself in situations like that, about how things could have gone wrong in 1,000 different ways. She would have been right, of course, but I still kept it to myself, filing it away as just another experience in the ongoing education of navigating the world as a young black man. The rest of the weekend passed uneventfully. I did homework, helped Mama around the house, fixed Mrs. Patterson's garbage disposal on Sunday afternoon for $20 that I immediately gave to Mama for groceries. It was a normal weekend, the kind that blended into all the other weekends in an endless succession of days that felt important while you were living them but would probably be forgotten within weeks. Monday morning arrived with all the enthusiasm of a funeral dirge. I dragged myself out of bed at 6:30, showered, got dressed, and grabbed a granola bar for breakfast because I was running late. Mama had already left for her morning cleaning job, having taken some aspirin for her back and promised me she'd take it easy. I walked the 1.5 miles to school because Mama needed the car and I didn't mind the exercise, arriving with about 5 minutes to spare before the first bell. Millbrook High on a Monday morning was its own special kind of chaos. Students clustered in groups in the hallways, comparing notes on weekend activities, catching up on gossip, cramming for tests they'd forgotten about. The air smelled like a combination of industrial cleaner, teenage body spray, and the breakfast sandwiches they sold in the cafeteria. I navigated through the crowd with practiced ease, heading to my locker to drop off my backpack and grab the books I needed for first period. "Yo, Darius." I turned to see Marcus pushing through the crowd toward me, his basketball jersey hanging loose over a white t-shirt, his ever-present backpack slung over one shoulder. Marcus was one of those people who seemed to know everyone and be liked by everyone, his natural charisma smoothing over any potential conflicts. He was grinning as he approached, which usually meant he had some kind of news or gossip to share. "What's up?" I said, executing the complicated handshake we'd perfected over years of friendship. "Did you hear?" he asked, his eyes bright with excitement. "Hear what?" "About the new girl, transfer student. Apparently she started this morning and everyone's losing their minds." I raised an eyebrow. "Transfer students aren't exactly rare." "This one is," Marcus insisted. "Word is she's from some super rich family, like Billionaire rich. And get this, she's apparently beautiful and nice and totally down to earth, or at least that's what everyone's saying after first period." I shrugged, not particularly interested. Rich people and their problems were as foreign to me as life on Mars. "Good for her, I guess." "Man, you have no curiosity," Marcus said, shaking his head. Aren't you at least a little interested in what brings a billionaire's daughter to Millbrook High? Not really, I admitted. I've got enough to worry about without concerning myself with rich people's business. The first bell rang, sending students scurrying toward their classrooms. Marcus and I headed in different directions, him to his AP history class and me to calculus, which was taught by Mrs. Morrison, a woman in her 60s who'd been teaching math at Millbrook High since before I was born. She was strict but fair, and she had a way of explaining complex concepts that actually made sense if you paid attention. I slid into my usual seat near the back of the classroom just as the second bell rang, pulling out my notebook and calculator. The room gradually filled with other students, the usual mix of seniors who needed the class for college applications and a few juniors who were ahead in math. I was only half paying attention to who was coming and going, more focused on trying to remember the homework assignment from Friday, when I heard a voice that made me freeze. "Is this seat taken?" I looked up and my brain ground to a complete halt. Standing next to the empty desk beside me, smiling uncertainly, was Madison Whitmore, the girl from the highway. The girl with the Mercedes and the designer clothes and the father who apparently didn't know she'd borrowed his car. Except she wasn't wearing designer clothes anymore. She was dressed like a regular student in jeans and a Millbrook High t-shirt that looked like it came from the school store, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in a ponytail. For a moment I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was seeing. She was here in my school, in my calculus class. The universe was either playing an elaborate joke on me or had a deeply twisted sense of irony. "Darius," she said, and the way she said my name, like we were friends or at least friendly acquaintances, snapped me out of my shocked silence. "No," I managed to say. "Seat's not taken." "Great." She slid into the desk with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased, like she was happy to see me, like this was some kind of fortunate coincidence instead of a potential disaster. "I was hoping I'd run into you. This is crazy, right? Small world." "Yeah," I said, because what else could I say? Small world. Mrs. Morrison called the class to order, saving me from having to continue this surreal conversation. She launched into a review of Friday's homework, and I tried to focus on derivatives and chain rules, but I was acutely aware of Madison sitting next to me, of the occasional glances she threw my way, of the whispers rippling through the classroom as other students noticed the new girl had chosen to sit next to Darius Thompson. I could feel the weight of attention settling on me like a physical thing, could sense the questions forming in people's minds. Why was the new rich girl sitting with him? Did they know each other? What was going on? In a school like Millbrook High, where social hierarchies were clearly defined and crossing those boundaries was rare, this was the equivalent of a bomb going off in the middle of a quiet afternoon. When the bell finally rang signaling the end of class, I packed up my things quickly, hoping to make a fast exit, but Madison was faster. "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" she asked, following me out into the hallway. I stopped, aware that we were attracting attention, that people were watching with undisguised curiosity. "Sure." She bit her lip, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd sat down next to me. "I know this is weird, me being here, I mean. I should have mentioned on Saturday that I was transferring to Millbrook, but it all happened so fast and I didn't really think about it. And then when I saw you in class, I got excited because, hey, I actually know someone here, and I probably should have thought about how this might be weird for you before I just sat down and—" "Madison," I interrupted gently because she was rambling and it was actually kind of endearing in a strange way. "It's fine. You can sit wherever you want. You don't need my permission." "Are you sure?" she asked, searching my face. "Because if it's going to cause problems for you, I can sit somewhere else. I don't want to make your life harder or anything." The fact that she was even thinking about that she recognized this might complicate things for me in ways she didn't fully understand, surprised me. Most people wouldn't have considered it. It's fine, I repeated, and I mostly meant it. Really, she smiled, relieved. Okay, good. Because honestly, calculus is already kicking my butt and I was kind of hoping you might be willing to study together sometime. You seem smart. I'm decent at math, I admitted. Not brilliant or anything, but I can usually work through the problems. That's better than me. I'm terrible at math, always have been. My tutor back home basically had to hold my hand through every problem. Back home. That phrase hung in the air between us, raising questions I wasn't sure I wanted to ask. Where was home? Why had she left? What brought a girl who apparently had tutors and Merceds and designer clothes to Millbrook, Georgia? But before I could decide whether to ask any of those questions, the warning bell rang, signaling we had 3 minutes to get to second period. Madison's eyes widened. Crap, I still don't really know where my classes are. I'm going to be so late. What do you have next? I asked. She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her back pocket, her class schedule, and scanned it quickly. English with Mrs. Patterson. I can show you where that is, I offered because it was on my way to my own second period class. Come on. We navigated through the crowded hallways, me leading the way and Madison following close behind, asking questions about teachers and classes and the general layout of the school. She was friendly and open in a way that seemed genuine rather than calculated, asking about my favorite classes and what I did after school and whether the food in the cafeteria was as terrible as it looked. I found myself relaxing slightly despite my better judgment, answering her questions with more than monosyllables, even making her laugh once with a sarcastic comment about the mystery meat they served on Tuesdays. When we reached Mrs. Patterson's classroom, Madison thanked me with that same bright smile and disappeared inside. I continued to my own class, acutely aware that I'd just spent 5 minutes in the hallway with the new girl, that people had seen us, that this was going to be the subject of conversation and speculation. I could already imagine what people would say, the assumptions they'd make, the narrative they'd construct. Second period was a blur. Third period was worse. By lunchtime, it seemed like half the school had heard that the new billionaire's daughter and Darius Thompson were friends, a piece of gossip that had been embellished and distorted with each retelling until it bore only a passing resemblance to reality. I heard whispers in the hallway, saw looks thrown my way, felt the weight of attention in a way that made my skin prickle with discomfort. I met up with Marcus, Jamal, and Sierra in the cafeteria as usual, claiming our regular table in the corner far from the popular kids' territory. They descended on me immediately, all three of them talking over each other in their excitement. "Dude, is it true?" Jamal asked, his eyes wide. "Is what true?" I countered, even though I knew exactly what he was asking. "That you know Madison Whitmore," Sierra said, leaning across the table. "That you two are friends." "We're not friends," I said firmly. "I helped her fix her car on Saturday. She happens to be in my calculus class, that's it." "That's not what I heard," Marcus said with a grin. "I heard you were walking her to class, that you were laughing together in the hallway, that she specifically chose to sit next to you in calculus even though there were other empty seats." I sighed, picking at the sandwich I'd brought from home. "People need to get a life." "Come on, D," Sierra said, her voice softening. "You have to know this is huge. Madison Whitmore is like the talk of the school. Everyone wants to know about her, and you actually know her." "I don't know her," I insisted. "I fixed her car. We've talked for maybe a total of 15 minutes. That's not knowing someone." "Still," Jamal said, "that's 15 minutes more than anyone else here. What's she like? Is she stuck up?" "She doesn't seem stuck up." I thought about how to answer that, about the girl who'd been afraid of me on the highway and the girl who'd sat next to me in calculus like it was the most natural thing in the world. "She seems okay, I guess." "Normal. Normal," Marcus repeated, laughing. "Darius, there is nothing normal about a billionaire's daughter transferring to Millbrook High. There's a story there has to be." He was right, of course. There was definitely a story. but it wasn't my story to tell or even my story to know. I was just a bit player who'd happened to cross paths with her at the right moment to fix her car. That didn't make us friends. It didn't make me privy to her life or her secrets. It just made me someone who'd done a good deed, and now I was paying for it with unwanted attention and speculation. The cafeteria doors opened, and a hush fell over the room in a wave, starting from the entrance and rippling outward. I looked up to see Madison standing in the doorway, her eyes scanning the crowded cafeteria with an expression that looked lost and a little overwhelmed. For a moment, she just stood there, and I could see the exact moment she realized that everyone was staring at her, that she'd become the center of attention in a way that was clearly uncomfortable. Her eyes found mine across the cafeteria, and I saw relief wash over her face. Before I could process what was happening, she was walking toward our table, weaving between the other tables with purpose, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed her like a wake. My friends went silent, their eyes wide, as Madison approached and stopped right next to our table. "Hey," she said, looking down at me with that uncertain smile again. "Is it okay if I sit with you guys? I don't really know anyone else yet." The cafeteria was dead silent, everyone waiting to see what would happen, how I would respond. I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on us, could sense the moment crystallizing into something that would be remembered and discussed and analyzed. This was one of those crossroads moments where a decision made in a split second would ripple outward in ways I couldn't predict or control. I could say no. I could tell her politely that this table was for our friend group, that she should sit with kids from her own social class, with the popular kids who were probably dying for a chance to be friends with someone rich and beautiful. That would be the safe choice, the choice that wouldn't upset the social order or paint a target on my back any larger than the one already there. Or I could say yes. I could make room at our table, introduce her to my friends, and let whatever was going to happen happen. That choice felt dangerous in ways I couldn't fully articulate, like stepping onto thin ice and hearing the first ominous crack beneath your feet. But it also felt right in a fundamental way, like this was a test of who I was and who I wanted to be. "Sure," I heard myself say, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. "There's room." I scooted over on the bench, making space between me and Marcus, and Madison slid in with a grateful smile that seemed to light up her whole face. The cafeteria slowly returned to its normal volume level, though I could still feel eyes on us, could still sense the shift that had just occurred in the social ecosystem of Millbrook High. "Thanks," Madison said, setting down her lunch tray which held the same questionable cafeteria food the rest of us were eating. I was starting to feel like I was in a zoo or something. Everyone's been staring at me all morning. "That's because you're new," Sierra said, and I could hear the guardedness in her voice, the protective instinct kicking in. "And because of who you are." Madison's smile faltered slightly. "Yeah, I guess word got around fast. Small school," Jamal offered. "News travels at light speed, especially when it involves someone from outside Millbrook. Especially when it involves a billionaire's daughter," Marcus added, and I shot him a warning look that he ignored. "No point dancing around it. Everyone already knows." Madison set down her fork, her food untouched, and looked around at all of us. "Look, I get that my dad being rich is weird for you guys. It's weird for me too, honestly, but I'm just trying to have a normal high school experience, make some friends, not be treated like I'm from another planet." "Are you though?" Sierra asked, her tone sharp enough to cut. "From another planet, I mean, because coming from where you come from to here, that's a pretty big leap." I could see Madison trying to figure out how to respond to that, could see her weighing her words carefully. "You're right," she finally said. "It is a big leap, and I'm sure I'm going to screw up a lot as I figure things out, but I'm trying. That has to count for something, right?" There was something disarming about her honesty, about the way she wasn't trying to pretend she was something she wasn't. Sierra's expression softened slightly, though she still looked skeptical. Marcus and Jamal exchanged glances, having one of their silent conversations that came from years of friendship. "I'm Sierra," Sierra finally said, extending her hand across the table. "That's Marcus and Jamal, and you already know Darius." "I do," Madison said, shaking Sierra's hand, "and then the guys. He saved my life on Saturday. Well, maybe not my life, but definitely saved me from a very long wait on the side of the highway and possibly being grounded for the rest of my natural life." "You fixed her car?" Marcus asked me, eyebrows raised. "Battery terminal was loose," I explained with a shrug. "Took like 5 minutes. And you didn't even charge her?" Jamal asked, grinning. "Man, you are too nice for your own good." "That's what I told him," Madison agreed, and suddenly we were all talking, the ice broken by that shared moment of agreement about my supposed niceness. The conversation flowed more easily after that, moving from classes to teachers to the general weirdness of high school. Madison asked questions about the school, about the town, about the things there were to do around here, and we answered as best we could, though our answers probably made Millbrook sound even more boring than it actually was. I noticed that Madison was genuinely engaged in the conversation, not just waiting for her turn to talk, but actually listening to what we said, asking follow-up questions, laughing at our jokes. It would have been easy for her to be condescending or to make us feel small with casual mentions of her previous life, but she didn't. She kept the focus on the present, on getting to know us as people rather than showcasing how different her life had been. Still, bits and pieces slipped through. A mention of her previous school, which was apparently some elite private academy in Connecticut. A reference to traveling to Europe last summer. A comment about missing her horse, said so casually that it took a moment to register that she actually owned a horse, like that was a normal thing for a teenager. Each of these little glimpses into her world served as a reminder of the vast gulf between her life and ours, between the resources available to her and the daily struggles we faced. The lunch period flew by faster than usual, and when the bell rang signaling it was time for fourth period, I was surprised to realize I'd actually enjoyed myself. Madison had fit into our group more easily than I would have predicted, and my friends seemed to have accepted her, at least provisionally. As we gathered our trash and prepared to head to our next classes, Madison turned to me with a hopeful expression. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "For lunch, I mean." "That's okay with everyone." I looked at my friends who all nodded or shrugged their agreement. "Yeah," I said, "same time tomorrow." Her smile could have powered the entire school for a week. "Great, see you guys later." She headed off in one direction while the four of us went in another, and the moment she was out of earshot, my friends all turned to me with identical expressions of disbelief. "Okay, that was surreal," Marcus said. "She's not what I expected," Sierra admitted. "I thought she'd be more, I don't know, stuck up or fake or something." "She seems genuinely nice," Jamal added, "which is almost more confusing. Why would someone like her want to hang out with us?" It was a question I'd been asking myself, one that didn't have an easy answer. "Maybe she's just lonely," I suggested. "New school, new town, doesn't know anyone, we're just convenient." "Maybe," Sierra said, but she didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe there's more to the story than we know." She was right, of course. There was definitely more to the story. People like Madison didn't just show up at schools like Millbrook High without a reason, without something driving that decision. But whatever that reason was, she clearly wasn't ready to share it, and I wasn't going to push. Everyone was entitled to their privacy, to their secrets, to the parts of their story they chose not to tell. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of classes and homework and the usual mundane routine. Madison and I crossed paths a few more times in the hallways, exchanging brief greetings that were watched and analyzed by dozens of eyes. I tried to ignore the attention, tried to go about my business like normal, but it was impossible not to notice the shift in how people were looking at me. Some of it was curiosity, some of it was confusion, and some of it was something darker, something that looked uncomfortably like resentment. After school, I headed to my shift at Henderson's Hardware, grateful for the familiar routine and the escape from the social minefield that school had become. Mr. Henderson greeted me with his usual grunt and immediately set me to work reorganizing the plumbing section, which had become hopelessly disorganized over the weekend. I lost myself in the simple, methodical task of sorting pipe fittings and organizing them by size and type, letting my mind go quiet in a way it rarely could during the chaos of the school day. I was about halfway through the reorganization when the bell over the door chimed, indicating a customer. I looked up automatically, ready to call out a greeting, and felt my stomach drop. Madison Whitmore had just walked into Henderson's Hardware, looking around with bright, curious eyes like she'd just entered some exotic foreign marketplace instead of a dusty old hardware store. She spotted me immediately, her face lighting up with that same enthusiastic smile. "Darius, I was hoping I'd find you here. Marcus told me you worked at Henderson's after school." I set down the box of pipe fittings I'd been holding, acutely aware of the grease on my hands and the dust on my clothes. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you, obviously," she said, walking toward me with an ease that suggested she'd never felt uncomfortable or out of place anywhere in her life. "I wanted to ask you something." Mr. Henderson emerged from the back office, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. He looked at Madison, then at me, then back at Madison, his expression unreadable. "This young lady a friend of yours, Darius?" he asked, his gravelly voice making it sound more like an accusation than a question. "Yes, sir," I said, because what else could I say? "She's new at school." He studied Madison for a long moment, and I could practically see him cataloging every detail, from her expensive shoes to the designer watch on her wrist to the way she carried herself with unconscious confidence. Then he looked back at me. "Well, don't let me interrupt your work," he said finally. "Those pipes aren't going to organize themselves." It wasn't exactly permission to talk to Madison, but it wasn't a prohibition either. Mr. Henderson retreated to his office, leaving us alone in the aisle. "Sorry," Madison said, her voice lower. "I didn't mean to get you in trouble with your boss." "You didn't," I assured her, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "What did you want to ask me?" She took a breath, looking almost nervous, which was strange given how confident she'd been all day. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to tutor me in calculus. I'll pay you, obviously, whatever your rate is." I blinked at her, processing this request. "I don't have a rate, I've never tutored anyone before." "Well, what do you think is fair? $20 an hour, 30 more?" The amounts she was throwing around so casually made my head spin. $20 an hour was more than I made at the hardware store. $30 an hour was almost obscene for a high school student tutoring another high school student. "Madison, I can't take that kind of money from you," I said firmly. "Why not?" she asked, looking genuinely confused. "You'd be providing a service, you should be compensated fairly." "Because it feels wrong," I tried to explain, "like I'd be taking advantage or something." "Taking advantage," she laughed, but it wasn't a mean laugh, more like she found the whole concept absurd. "Darius, trust me, you helping me with calculus is not taking advantage. If anything, I'd be taking advantage of you by getting help from someone who actually understands this stuff. Please, I really need help, and I'd feel better if I could pay you for your time." I hesitated, torn between my need for money, which was very real and pressing, and my discomfort with accepting it from her, which was equally real if harder to articulate. In the end, practicality won out over pride. $10 an hour, I said firmly. "That's my rate, take it or leave it." She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "Deal, when can we start?" "I work here until 6 most days," I said, "and I have homework, maybe weekends." "Perfect, Saturday afternoon we could meet at the library or something." "The library works," I agreed. mentally calculating how many hours of tutoring I could reasonably manage and what that money could mean for me and Mama. Even a few hours a week at $10 an hour could make a real difference. Great, she said, pulling out her phone. Give me your number and I'll text you to set up the details. I rattled off my number, watching as she typed it into her phone, and a second later my own phone buzzed in my pocket with a text from an unknown number. Now you have mine too, she said with a grin. See you tomorrow at school. See you tomorrow, I confirmed. She gave me a little wave and headed for the door, and I watched her go with mixed feelings churning in my chest. On one hand, this tutoring arrangement could be really helpful financially. On the other hand, it meant spending more time with Madison Whitmore, which seemed like it would inevitably lead to complications I couldn't even begin to predict. Mr. Henderson emerged from his office as soon as the door closed behind Madison, his expression thoughtful. "That girl's got money," he observed, stating the obvious. "Yes, sir, she does. She treating you right, being respectful." The question surprised me and I turned to look at him fully. Mr. Henderson was many things, but he wasn't someone I'd ever thought of as particularly concerned with my social life or my feelings. "Yes, sir," I said honestly. "She's been respectful." He nodded slowly. "Good, you let me know if that changes. Money doesn't give people the right to treat you poorly, no matter what color they are or what side of town they come from." It was maybe the longest speech I'd ever heard Mr. Henderson make on a personal topic, and it touched me more than I wanted to admit. "I will, thank you," he grunted, which was his version of "you're welcome," and retreated back to his office. I returned to organizing pipe fittings, but my mind was elsewhere, turning over the events of the day and trying to make sense of how my life had become so complicated so quickly. That evening, I told Mama about the tutoring arrangement while we ate dinner together, a simple meal of baked chicken and rice that Mama had somehow found the energy to prepare despite her aching back. She listened carefully as I explained about Madison and the calculus tutoring and the $10 an hour, her expression shifting from interest to concern to something that looked almost like sadness. "Baby, you know I appreciate you trying to help with money," she said when I finished. "But I want you to be careful with this girl." "Careful how?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea where this was going. "Just, careful, rich white girl, poor black boy. That story doesn't usually end well. People are going to talk. They're going to make assumptions. They're going to see you two spending time together, and they're going to create narratives that might not be true but could hurt you just the same." She wasn't wrong, and I knew it. The racial and class dynamics at play here were complicated and fraught with the potential for misunderstanding and worse. But I also felt like I couldn't live my life in constant fear of what other people might think or say or do. "I'm just helping her with math, Mama," I said gently. "That's all this is." "I know, baby, I know. Just promise me you'll be smart about it. Keep things professional. Don't put yourself in situations that could be misinterpreted. And if she or anyone else makes you uncomfortable, you walk away. Pride isn't worth your safety or your future." "I promise," I said, and I meant it. We finished dinner in companionable silence, and I helped Mama clean up the kitchen before retreating to my room to tackle my own homework. But I found it hard to concentrate. My mind kept drifting back to Madison and the strange series of events that had brought her into my life. I barely knew this girl, had spent maybe an hour total in her presence, and yet she was already changing things, creating ripples that were spreading outward in ways I couldn't control or predict. I pulled out my phone and looked at the text she'd sent me earlier, just a simple "Hey, it's Madison" with a smiley face. It seemed innocent enough, just one classmate reaching out to another, but I knew it was more complicated than that. Everything was more complicated than it seemed on the surface. The next few days fell into a new routine. Madison continued to sit with us at lunch, gradually becoming part of our friend group despite the initial strangeness of it all. She was good at fitting in, at finding common ground with people who came from completely different worlds. She laughed at Marcus's terrible jokes, engaged Sierra in heated debates about college and career plans, bonded with Jamal over their shared love of terrible reality TV shows. And with me she was friendly but not overly familiar, maintaining a boundary that felt appropriate and safe. The attention we received at school didn't die down as quickly as I'd hoped. If anything, it intensified. The sight of Madison Whitmore eating lunch with Darius Thompson and his friends became a daily spectacle, something people watched and commented on and tried to understand. I heard whispers in the hallways, saw the looks thrown our way, felt the weight of judgment from multiple directions. Some of the black kids at school seemed to view my friendship with Madison as a betrayal of some kind, like I was abandoning my own community to curry favor with a rich white girl. I got a few pointed comments, some supposedly joking remarks that carried an edge of real resentment. Others seemed to think I was being used somehow, that Madison was slumming it with the poor kids for her own amusement and would discard us the moment something better came along. The white kids had their own reactions, ranging from confusion to disapproval to outright hostility. I caught dirty looks from some of the guys on the football team, heard muttered comments that weren't quite loud enough to confront but were definitely loud enough to hear. There was a particular group of girls who'd apparently decided Madison should be part of their clique, the popular crowd that ruled the social hierarchy of Millbrook High, and they seemed personally offended that she'd chosen to sit with us instead. Through it all, Madison seemed oblivious, or at least chose to act oblivious. She navigated the school's social landscape with an ease that suggested she either didn't notice or didn't care about the undercurrents of tension her presence created. I wasn't sure which possibility was more concerning. Saturday arrived, and with it, our first tutoring session. We'd agreed to meet at the library at 2 o'clock, which gave me time to sleep in a bit and help Mama with some chores around the house. She was moving better this week, the rest having helped her back somewhat, though I could still see her wincing when she thought I wasn't looking. The Millbrook Public Library was a small but well-maintained building right in the center of town, built in the 1920s with the kind of attention to architectural detail that modern buildings seem to lack. It had high ceilings and big windows and rows of wooden shelves that smelled like old books and furniture polish. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, had been running the place for as long as anyone could remember, and she kept it organized with an efficiency that bordered on militant. I arrived a few minutes early, checking in with Mrs. Chen and claiming one of the study tables in the back corner where we'd have some privacy and quiet. Madison showed up right at 2 o'clock, carrying a backpack that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and looking somehow both nervous and excited. "Hey," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Thanks for doing this." "Thanks for the opportunity," I replied, because it felt like something I should say even though it sounded stiff and formal to my own ears. We settled into the work, Madison pulling out her calculus textbook and notes while I reviewed what we'd covered in class that week. It quickly became apparent that Madison's struggles with calculus weren't due to laziness or lack of trying. She genuinely found the concepts difficult, her brain not quite wired to think in the abstract mathematical terms that the subject required. But she was willing to work, asking questions when she didn't understand, working through practice problems even when they frustrated her, sticking with it even when I could see her getting discouraged. I found I was actually pretty good at explaining things, at breaking down complex concepts into simpler components, at finding different ways to illustrate the same idea until something clicked. When Madison finally understood a particularly tricky derivative problem, her face lit up with genuine joy, and I felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the simple pleasure of helping someone learn. We worked for 2 hours straight, only taking a short break halfway through when Mrs. Chen brought us some water and cookies she'd apparently brought from home. When we finally packed up our materials, Madison looked exhausted but happy. "That actually helped so much," she said, shoving her textbook into her backpack. "You're a really good teacher, Darius. Have you ever thought about doing this professionally?" I shrugged, uncomfortable with the compliment. "Not really. I figured I'd go into something more hands-on, maybe become a mechanic or an electrician." "You'd be good at that too," she said. "You seem good at fixing things, understanding how stuff works." We walked out of the library together into the late afternoon sunshine. Madison's car was parked in the lot, not the Mercedes from before but a different expensive vehicle that I couldn't identify but that screamed money just as loudly. "Same time next week?" she asked, pulling out her wallet. "Sure," I agreed and watched as she counted out $20 in bills and handed them to me. "That's for 2 hours," she said, "10 per hour like we agreed." I took the money, folding it carefully and putting it in my pocket. It felt significant, this transaction, this exchange of labor for compensation. It made our relationship something official, something that had clear boundaries and expectations. That felt safer somehow than the ambiguity of friendship. "See you Monday at school," I said. "See you Monday," she replied with a wave, and then she was getting into her car and driving away, and I was left standing in the parking lot with $20 in my pocket, and the strange feeling that something important had just happened even though I couldn't quite say what. The weeks began to blend together in a new pattern that became familiar through repetition. School days filled with classes and homework, and the ongoing social navigation of being seen as friends with Madison Whitmore. Lunch periods at our regular table where Madison had become a fixture, accepted by my friends even if the rest of the school still viewed the arrangement with confusion or disapproval. After-school shifts at Henderson's Hardware where I lost myself in the simple physicality of manual labor. Saturday afternoons at the library where I helped Madison wrestle with calculus, and she paid me $10 an hour that I immediately gave to Mama to help with bills and groceries. I was learning things about Madison in these sessions, small details that accumulated into a broader picture of who she was beyond the surface-level rich girl persona. She was funny in a self-deprecating way, quick to laugh at herself when she made mistakes. She was genuinely curious about the world, asking questions about everything from how engines worked to what it was like growing up in Millbrook to my thoughts on books and movies and music. She was more thoughtful than I'd expected, sometimes going quiet in the middle of a conversation like she was thinking deeply about something, weighing her words before speaking. But there were also gaps in her story, questions she deflected or answered vaguely. When I asked about her family, she'd mention her father but never her mother. When I asked why she'd transferred to Millbrook, she gave non-answers about wanting a change of pace and experiencing a different kind of school. When I asked about her old life in Connecticut, she'd share amusing anecdotes but never anything too personal or revealing. It was like she'd carefully constructed a version of herself to present to the world, friendly and open but with walls around the deeper parts. I didn't push, partly because it wasn't my business and partly because I had walls of my own. I didn't talk much about my absent father or my mama's health problems or the financial stress that was a constant background hum in my life. I didn't share the experiences of racism I'd endured or my fears about the future or the dreams I was afraid to voice because speaking them aloud might jinx them somehow. We were both protecting ourselves, maintaining boundaries that kept our relationship in safe territory. October slid into November, the weather cooling down to something almost comfortable. The leaves on the oak trees turned gold and red, carpeting the ground with color that crunched satisfyingly underfoot. Halloween came and went, marked by half-hearted decorations in store windows and groups of kids trick-or-treating in the safer neighborhoods. Thanksgiving loomed on the horizon, promising a 4-day weekend that I was looking forward to more than I wanted to admit. It was a Wednesday in mid-November when things started to shift in ways I didn't immediately recognize as significant. I was at my locker between second and third period, switching out books when I became aware of a presence beside me. I looked over to see Tyler Morrison, one of the football team's star players, leaning against the locker next to mine with his arms crossed and an expression on his face that I couldn't quite read. Tyler and I had never had much interaction. He ran in completely different circles, part of the popular crowd that I'd always avoided. He was tall and broad-shouldered with the kind of confidence that came from being good-looking and athletic, and knowing that those things gave you social currency. His family was one of the old money families. The Morrisons had been in Millbrook for generations, owning businesses and land and wielding the kind of influence that came with that history. Darius Thompson, right, he said, even though we both knew he knew exactly who I was. That's right, I said carefully, closing my locker and turning to face him fully. I wanted to talk to you about Madison Whitmore. Of course, this was about Madison. Everything seemed to be about Madison lately. Okay, I said neutrally. What about her? I'm just curious what your angle is, he said, his tone conversational but with an edge underneath. What you're getting out of this whole friendship thing you've got going on. I felt my jaw tighten but kept my voice level. There's no angle, we're just friends. Friends, he repeated, like the word tasted funny in his mouth. That's interesting, because from where I'm standing it looks like you're taking advantage of a situation. New girl comes to town, doesn't know any better, and you swoop in to befriend her. Probably hoping she'll share some of that family money, am I right? The accusation stung, partly because it was so unfair and partly because it echoed some of my own private worries about how our friendship might look from the outside. You don't know what you're talking about, I said, fighting to keep my voice calm. Don't I? He pushed off from the locker, standing up straight in a way that emphasized the few inches of height he had on me. See, here's the thing. Madison comes from a certain kind of family. She's used to a certain kind of people, and I don't think it's appropriate for someone like you to be taking up so much of her time. Someone like me. The phrase hung in the air between us, heavy with implications that Tyler was smart enough not to state directly, but that we both understood perfectly well. Madison can choose her own friends, I said, my voice harder now. She doesn't need your permission or anyone else's. Maybe not, Tyler agreed. But she does need protection from people who might try to use her, people who see dollar signs instead of a person. The irony of him accusing me of seeing Madison as a dollar sign was almost funny, given that he clearly viewed her the same way, just from a different angle. He wanted access to her wealth and status too, he just felt entitled to it in a way I never would. We done here? I asked, slinging my backpack over my shoulder. For now, Tyler said, but there was a promise of something unfinished in his tone. Just think about what I said. Think about whether it's really fair to Madison for you to keep monopolizing her attention when there are people who could offer her more appropriate friendships. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in the hallway with my blood pressure elevated and my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I took a few deep breaths, forcing myself to calm down, reminding myself that Tyler Morrison wasn't worth getting worked up over. But the encounter stayed with me throughout the day, his words echoing in my head even as I tried to dismiss them. Was I taking advantage of Madison? Was our friendship inappropriate somehow? I didn't think so, but I could see how it might look to someone predisposed to think the worst of me. A poor black kid befriending a rich white girl, accepting money to tutor her, spending time with her regularly. The optics weren't great, especially not in a town like Millbrook where old prejudices died hard. At lunch I was quieter than usual, picking at my food while the conversation flowed around me. Madison noticed, of course, because she was more observant than people gave her credit for. You okay? She asked during a lull in the conversation, her voice low enough that only I could hear. Fine, I said automatically, just tired. She studied my face like she was trying to decide whether to believe me but ultimately let it drop. The lunch period ended and we went our separate ways, but I could feel her concern lingering like a physical weight. The rest of the week passed without incident, though I noticed Tyler and some of his friends watching me and Madison more obviously, their stares pointed and deliberate. I did my best to ignore them, to focus on my classes and my work and the normal rhythms of my life, but it was getting harder to pretend that everything was fine. Saturday's tutoring session was good, productive in the way our sessions usually were. Madison was making real progress in calculus, her grades improving from barely passing to solid B's on recent tests. She was proud of this progress, and so was I, feeling like our work together was paying off in tangible ways. We finished up a bit early and were packing our things when Madison hesitated, like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to start. "What's up?" I asked, recognizing the look on her face. "I wanted to ask you something, and you can totally say no if you want, but I thought I'd at least ask." "Okay," I said warily. "Thanksgiving is next week," she said, "and my dad is having this big dinner thing at our house. He does it every year, invites a bunch of people from work and some people from town. It's kind of stuffy and formal and honestly pretty boring, but I was wondering if maybe you'd want to come as my guest." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "You want me to come to your Thanksgiving dinner?" "I know it's weird," she said quickly, "and I totally understand if you already have plans or if it's just too uncomfortable or whatever. But I thought it might be nice to have a friendly face there, someone who isn't one of my dad's business associates or town council members or whatever. Someone I actually enjoy talking to." There were so many reasons to say no to this invitation. It would mean spending Thanksgiving with rich white people, navigating social situations I had no experience with, potentially embarrassing myself or Madison or both. It would mean being on display, being scrutinized, being judged by people who already had opinions about someone like me. It would mean missing the quiet Thanksgiving Mama and I usually shared, just the two of us with a small turkey and whatever sides we could afford. But there was also something touching about the invitation, about the fact that Madison wanted me there, that she considered me enough of a friend to include me in what was clearly an important family event. And the truth was, I was curious. Curious about her world, about how the other half lived, about this father she mentioned but never really talked about. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course," she said, looking relieved that I hadn't immediately said no. "Just let me know by Monday so I can tell my dad to set an extra place." I promised I would, and we parted ways with our usual end-of-session routine. I spent the walk home turning the invitation over in my mind, weighing pros and cons, trying to imagine how Mama would react when I told her. As it turned out, Mama's reaction was complicated. When I brought it up that evening over dinner, she went very still, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth, her expression shifting through several emotions too quickly for me to read them all. "She invited you to Thanksgiving dinner at her house," she repeated slowly, setting down her fork. "Yeah," I confirmed. "She said her dad does this big formal dinner every year and she wanted a friendly face there." Mama was quiet for a long moment, staring at her plate like it held answers to questions she hadn't asked yet. "Do you want to go?" It was a fair question and one I'd been asking myself since Madison made the invitation. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me is curious, but part of me thinks it's a bad idea." "Why a bad idea?" "Because," I struggled to put the feeling into words, "because I don't belong in that world, Mama. Because people like Tyler Morrison are already questioning my friendship with Madison, suggesting I'm using her or taking advantage. Because going to her house for Thanksgiving feels like crossing a line somehow, like I'd be pretending to be something I'm not." Mama reached across the table and took my hand, her skin warm and calloused from years of hard work. "Baby, you listen to me. You belong anywhere you choose to be. You hear me, anywhere." Don't you ever let anyone make you feel like you're not good enough or not worthy just because of where you come from or the color of your skin. Her words were fierce, protective, coming from a place of deep love and even deeper pain. I squeezed her hand, grateful for her faith in me even when I didn't have faith in myself. But she continued, I also want you to be smart about this. Going to her house, meeting her father, being in that environment, it's going to be complicated. People are going to make assumptions. Some of them might be ugly. You need to be prepared for that. I know, I said, and you need to make sure Madison understands what she's asking of you. Does she get how hard this might be for you? Does she understand the position she's putting you in? It was a good question, one I wasn't sure I could answer. Did Madison understand the racial and class dynamics at play here? Did she recognize how different this invitation would feel for me versus for someone from her own background? I wanted to think she did, that her thoughtfulness extended to this level of awareness, but I honestly wasn't sure. I'll talk to her about it, I promised. And whatever you decide, I support you, Mama said. If you want to go, I'll be fine here. I can have Thanksgiving with Martha and her family like I've done before. If you want to stay home with me, that's fine too. This is your decision, baby. I trust you to make the right choice for yourself. I thought about it all weekend, weighing my options, trying to imagine each scenario. Finally, on Monday morning before first period, I found Madison at her locker and told her I'd come to her Thanksgiving dinner. The joy on her face made me think I'd made the right decision, even as a small voice in the back of my head warned me I might live to regret it. The week leading up to Thanksgiving was busy with the normal pre-holiday chaos. Teachers tried to cram in lessons before the break, students were distracted and restless, and there was a general atmosphere of anticipation that made it hard to focus on anything academic. Madison gave me her address and told me to arrive around 4 o'clock on Thursday. That dinner would be served at 6, but people would be arriving beforehand for drinks and appetizers. I didn't own any formal clothes. Everything in my closet was casual, practical, designed for school or work or the occasional church service when Mama could drag me along. The fanciest thing I owned was a pair of khaki pants and a button-down shirt that I'd bought at the thrift store for a debate competition sophomore year. I tried them on Wednesday night and was relieved to find they still fit, though the shirt was a bit snug across the shoulders. Mama insisted on ironing both the shirt and the pants, fussing over the creases with a care that suggested this was about more than just wrinkles. When I was dressed, she stood back and looked at me with an expression that was equal parts pride and worry. "You look handsome," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "So grown up." "Mama," I said, embarrassed. "Let me have this," she insisted. "My baby boy all dressed up and going to dinner with rich folks. Your grandmother would be so proud." I hugged her, careful not to wrinkle the shirt she'd worked so hard on, and promised I'd be home by 10 at the latest. She made me promise to text her when I arrived safely and again when I was leaving, standard mama protocols that I'd learned not to argue with. The drive to Madison's house took me to a part of town I'd rarely visited, beyond even the west side where Mama worked, into an area of genuine estates with gates and long driveways and houses set so far back from the road that you could barely see them through the trees. Madison had told me to look for a stone gate with a W worked into the ironwork, and when I found it I almost drove past it twice, not quite believing this was the right place. The gate was open, thank God, because I had no idea how I would have gotten in otherwise. I drove my mama's beat-up sedan up a winding driveway that seemed to go on forever, passing manicured lawns and what looked like a small pond, until finally the house came into view and I had to consciously close my mouth because it had fallen open in shock. It wasn't a house. It was a mansion. 3 stories of white stone and columns and windows that reflected the late afternoon sun like gold. There were already several cars parked in the circular driveway, expensive vehicles that made my mama's car look like it should be in a junkyard. I found a spot at the end of the line of cars and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel and trying to calm my racing heart. This was a mistake. This was such an obvious, terrible mistake. What was I doing here? I didn't belong in a place like this, with people who owned houses that probably had more rooms than my entire neighborhood had houses. I should turn around and leave, text Madison some excuse, go home and spend Thanksgiving with Mama like I should have planned to do in the first place. But even as I thought this, even as I planned my retreat, I was getting out of the car, closing the door softly, walking toward the massive front entrance with its double doors and brass fixtures that probably cost more than a year of my mama's salary. I rang the doorbell, heard it echo somewhere deep inside the house, and waited. The door opened to reveal a man in his 60s, white-haired and dignified in a suit that looked like it cost several $1,000s. For a moment I thought this must be Madison's father, but then I realized he was waiting expectantly for me to say something, his posture suggesting he was staff rather than family. "I'm Darius Thompson," I said, my voice embarrassingly uncertain. "Madison invited me." "Of course, Mr. Thompson," the man said with a slight smile that seemed genuinely warm. "Miss Madison mentioned you'd be arriving. Please come in, I'm Charles, the house manager. May I take your jacket?" I wasn't wearing a jacket, which suddenly seemed like another mark against me, another sign that I didn't belong here. "I'm okay, thanks." Charles nodded and stepped aside to let me enter. The foyer alone was bigger than my living room, with marble floors and a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a palace and a staircase that curved up to the second floor like something from a movie. I tried not to gape, tried to maintain some dignity, but it was hard when everything I saw reinforced just how different this world was from mine. "Miss Madison is in the drawing room with the other guests," Charles said. "If you'll follow me." I followed him through the house, passing room after room that seemed designed for purposes I could only guess at. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A formal dining room with a table that could seat 20 people. A sitting room with furniture that looked too expensive to actually sit on. Finally, we reached a large room where perhaps 15 people were gathered, holding drinks and talking in that particular way rich people talked, animated but controlled, loud enough to be heard but not so loud as to be crass. Madison spotted me immediately and her face lit up. She excused herself from the group she'd been standing with and hurried over, looking beautiful in a dark blue dress that probably cost more than my entire outfit including my shoes. "You came," she said, taking my hands in hers, and I could hear genuine relief in her voice like she'd been worried I wouldn't show up. "I'm so glad. Come on, let me introduce you to people." And just like that, I was swept into the party, Madison at my side making introductions that I immediately forgot, shaking hands with men in expensive suits and women in designer dresses, smiling and nodding and trying to remember the etiquette lessons Mama had drilled into me over the years. "Yes, sir. No, ma'am. Pleased to meet you. Thank you for having me." The people were polite in that careful way that well-bred Southerners were always polite, asking me bland questions about school and what I planned to study in college and whether I was enjoying Millbrook. But I could feel them assessing me, could see the calculations happening behind their polite smiles, could sense them trying to figure out what exactly I was doing here, what my relationship to Madison was, what box they should put me in. Madison stayed close to me during those first introductions, a steadying presence that I was grateful for even as I resented needing it. She had a way of steering conversations away from potentially uncomfortable topics, of filling awkward silences with easy chatter, of making it seem like having me there was the most natural thing in the world even when it clearly wasn't. After about 20 minutes of this careful social navigation, a man entered the room, and the energy shifted immediately. Everyone's attention turned toward him, conversations pausing mid-sentence, body language adjusting to acknowledge his presence. This, I understood immediately, was Madison's father, Richard Whitmore. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair going gray at the temples and the kind of face that the camera loved, handsome in a distinguished way that suggested power and success. He wore his wealth comfortably, his suit custom-tailored, his watch understated but undoubtedly expensive, his whole presence radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having had to question your place in the world. His eyes scanned the room and landed on Madison, his expression softening slightly. "There's my girl," he said, his voice carrying easily across the space. He moved toward us, and I felt my spine straighten involuntarily, some instinct telling me this was a moment that mattered. "Daddy," Madison said, and there was something in her voice I'd never heard before, a combination of affection and nervousness. "I want you to meet my friend Darius Thompson." Richard Whitmore turned his full attention to me, and I felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. He extended his hand and I shook it, his grip firm and assessing. "Darius," he said, his tone neutral. "Madison's told me about you. You're the young man who helped her when her car broke down." "Yes, sir," I said, proud that my voice came out steady. "It wasn't anything major, just a loose battery terminal. Nevertheless, you stopped to help when you could have kept walking. That says something about character." He paused, still holding my hand in that handshake, still studying my face. "Madison also tells me you've been tutoring her in calculus. She says you're an excellent teacher." "I do my best, sir. And modest, too," Richard said, finally releasing my hand. "How are your own grades, Darius?" "Mostly B's, sir, a few A's. I'm doing okay." "College plans?" "I'm thinking about technical school, sir, maybe get certified as a mechanic or electrician." Something flickered in Richard's expression, too quick for me to read. "Practical choice, nothing wrong with skilled trades. The world will always need people who know how to fix things." There was a pause, a moment where I felt like I was being tested somehow, judged against some standard I didn't fully understand. Then Richard smiled, a controlled expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, I'm glad Madison has made a friend," he said. "Make yourself at home, Darius. Dinner will be served shortly." He moved away then, drawn into conversation with a group of older men who were clearly waiting to talk business with him. Madison let out a breath I hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That went well," she said quietly. "Did it?" I asked, because I genuinely couldn't tell. "Trust me, if it hadn't gone well, you'd know my dad can be intense when he doesn't approve of something." I wanted to ask what there was to approve or disapprove of. We were just friends, but before I could, a soft chime sounded and Charles appeared to announce that dinner was served. The dining room was even more impressive than I'd first thought. The long table now set with china and crystal and silver that probably cost more than my mama would make in a decade. Place cards indicated where everyone should sit, and I found mine about halfway down the table, with Madison to my left and an older woman named Mrs. Caldwell to my right who introduced herself as a member of the town council. The meal was served in courses, each one brought out by staff who moved with silent efficiency. Salad, soup, a palate cleanser that I wasn't sure if I was supposed to eat or just look at. Then the main course of turkey and all the traditional fixings, prepared and presented in a way that elevated them beyond anything I'd ever eaten. The food was delicious, but I was too nervous to really enjoy it. Too focused on using the right fork and not saying the wrong thing and trying to blend into the background as much as possible. The conversation flowed around me, touching on topics I had little knowledge of or interest in. Stock markets and real estate investments and political connections and country club drama. I listened more than I spoke, offering the occasional comment when directly addressed but mostly staying quiet and trying to be invisible. About halfway through the main course, Richard Whitmore, seated at the head of the table, suddenly addressed me directly. his voice cutting through the multiple concurrent conversations. Darius, I understand you work at Henderson's Hardware. How long have you been there? The table went quiet, everyone's attention turning to me. I swallowed the bite of turkey I'd just taken and tried to look composed. About 2 years, sir, since I was 15. And you enjoy it? Yes, sir. Mr. Henderson has taught me a lot about tools and building materials and general repairs. It's good, honest work. Your father, what does he do? The question landed like a punch to the gut, unexpected and painful. I saw Madison's head snap toward her father, her expression alarmed, but I kept my eyes on Richard. My father isn't in the picture, sir, it's just me and my mama. I see, Richard said, and in those 2 words I could hear volumes. Conclusions being drawn, judgments being made, boxes being checked. And your mother, she works 2 jobs, sir, cleaning houses during the day and waitressing 3 nights a week at Miller's Diner. A hardworking woman, someone commented from further down the table, a man whose name I'd already forgotten. Very hardworking, I agreed, feeling defensive in a way I couldn't quite articulate. She's the strongest person I know. I'm sure she is, Richard said, his tone impossible to read. It must be difficult raising a child on her own in today's economy. We manage, I said, aware that I was being assessed, that every word I said was being weighed and measured. Mama's made sure I've had everything I needed, that I've stayed focused on school and stayed out of trouble. I'm grateful for her sacrifices. Richard nodded slowly, then mercifully turned his attention to another guest, asking about some business matter that I tuned out. I felt Madison's hand briefly touch my arm under the table, a gesture of support or apology, I wasn't sure which. I gave her a small smile to let her know I was okay, even though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Dessert was served, some elaborate confection that was almost too beautiful to eat. Coffee and after-dinner drinks were offered, which I declined. Eventually, people began to leave, thanking Richard for his hospitality and making their way out in 1s and 2s. Madison walked me to my car, the 2 of us stepping out into the cool November evening. The stars were bright overhead, undimmed by the minimal light pollution this far from town. I'm sorry about my dad, Madison said as soon as we were out of earshot of the house. Some of those questions were out of line. It's okay, I said, though I wasn't sure it was. He was just trying to figure out who I am, where I come from. He was judging you, Madison said bluntly. I could see it. I know how he operates, what he's thinking when he asks those kinds of questions. And what was he thinking? She hesitated, clearly not wanting to say it out loud. That you're not from our world. That you don't fit, that she trailed off. That I'm poor, black, not good enough to be friends with his daughter. I didn't say that, she protested. You didn't have to, I said, not unkindly. Madison, I know what I am and what I'm not. I know how people like your dad see people like me. It's okay, I'm not mad at you. Well, I'm mad, she said fiercely. I'm mad that he couldn't just be polite and welcoming without making it into some kind of interrogation. I'm mad that he made you uncomfortable in what was supposed to be a nice evening. I'm mad that the world is set up this way, where people are judged by their bank account or their last name instead of who they actually are. Her passion was touching, and I could see that she genuinely meant every word. But there was also a naivety to it, a privileged assumption that being mad about injustice was the same as understanding it or experiencing it. Thank you for inviting me, I said, changing the subject. The food was amazing, and it was interesting to see how the other half lives. She winced at that phrase but didn't deny it. Will you still tutor me, still sit with me at lunch, still be my friend? Of course, I said, surprised that she thought tonight would change any of that. Why wouldn't I? I don't know, she admitted. I just worry that I keep making your life more complicated, that maybe you'd be better off if we'd never met. Too late now, I said with a small smile. We're stuck with each other. She hugged me then, suddenly and tightly, and after a moment of surprise I hugged her back. When we separated, there were tears in her eyes. Thank you for coming tonight, she said. It meant a lot to me to have you here. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and got into my car. I watched in the rearview mirror as she stood there, a small figure in her blue dress, until I turned a corner and she disappeared from view. The drive home felt longer than the drive there, my mind churning over everything that had happened. The opulence of the house, the careful politeness of the guests, the way Richard Whitmore had questioned me like I was a suspect in some crime. The weight of being the only black person in that room, of representing not just myself but every stereotype and assumption people had about who I was supposed to be. When I got home, Mama was still up, waiting for me in the living room with a cup of tea. She took one look at my face and opened her arms, and I went to her like I was 6 years old again, sitting next to her on the couch and letting her hold me while I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her hand rubbing slow circles on my back the way she used to do when I was small and had a nightmare. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "How do you feel?" she finally asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Angry, I think, but also confused. And maybe a little sad." "Sad about what?" "About the fact that no matter how hard I try, no matter how good my grades are or how polite I am or how much I help people, there will always be people who look at me and only see what I'm not. Not rich enough, not white enough, not from the right family or the right background." "Baby," Mama said, her voice thick with emotion, "that's their limitation, not yours. The problem isn't with you. The problem is with a system that teaches people to value the wrong things, to judge based on circumstances instead of character." "But knowing that doesn't make it hurt less," I said. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't, but it's important to remember all the same. You are enough, Darius, just as you are right now. You don't need to be richer or different or anything other than exactly who you are. And anyone who can't see that, who can't see the good and decent young man you've become, well, that's their loss." I let her words wash over me, wanting to believe them even as doubt gnawed at the edges. We sat there together until I felt calm enough to stand, to wish her good night, to retreat to my room where I could be alone with my thoughts. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept replaying the evening in my mind, dissecting conversations and looks and moments, trying to understand what they meant and how I was supposed to feel about all of it. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted and no closer to any answers. Friday was a blessedly quiet day. Most people were still caught up in their own Thanksgiving activities, and I spent the day helping Mama around the house and trying not to think too hard about the previous evening. Madison texted me a few times, just checking in and reiterating her apology for her father's behavior. I assured her again that it was fine, that I wasn't upset with her, that we were good. But when I returned to school the following Monday, I could immediately sense that something had changed. The looks people gave me were different, more pointed, more hostile. The whispers seemed louder, more deliberate. Something had happened over the break, some piece of gossip had spread, and I was at the center of it. I found out what it was during second period, when Tyler Morrison intercepted me in the hallway with a smirk on his face that made my stomach drop. "Heard you had Thanksgiving dinner at the Whitmore mansion," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Moving up in the world, Thompson, or are you just playing a long game?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to push past him. He blocked my path, his smirk widening. "Come on, man, we all know what's going on. You're smart, I'll give you that. Befriend the new rich girl, get her to trust you, maybe eventually get your hands on some of that money. It's actually kind of brilliant, in a pathetic sort of way." "That's not what's happening," I said, my voice hard. "Madison is my friend, that's all." "Right," Tyler drawled. "Just friends. That's why you're tutoring her, why you sit with her every day at lunch, why you got invited to her house for a major holiday. Just friends." "Yes," I said firmly. "Just friends, not that it's any of your business." "It becomes my business when you're taking advantage of someone who doesn't know any better. Someone needs to look out for Madison's interests, and clearly her father isn't doing a good enough job if he's letting someone like you into his house." The racist implication was barely even veiled at this point. I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides, felt the anger rising hot and sharp in my chest. But I also heard Mama's voice in my head, reminding me that fighting Tyler Morrison in the hallway would only confirm every stereotype he already believed about me. "Move," I said, my voice low and controlled. For a moment I thought he might actually try to stop me, might push this into physical confrontation. But then a teacher appeared at the end of the hallway and Tyler stepped aside with an exaggerated bow that was clearly mocking. I walked away without looking back, my whole body trembling with suppressed rage and hurt and frustration. The rest of the day was a nightmare. Everywhere I went, I could feel people looking at me differently. The black students seemed disappointed, like I'd betrayed some unspoken alliance by associating too closely with a wealthy white girl. The white students seemed suspicious or hostile, seeing me as either a social climber or a threat or both. At lunch, I almost didn't go to the cafeteria, almost hid out in the library or my car until the period was over. But that felt like letting them win, like admitting I'd done something wrong when I knew I hadn't. So I walked into that cafeteria with my head up and my shoulders back, and I went to our usual table where my friends were already sitting. Madison was there too, and the moment she saw me, I could tell she'd heard the rumors. Her face was pale, her expression strained. "Darius," she started, but I shook my head. "Not now," I said quietly, "not here." We ate in uncomfortable silence, the easy camaraderie of previous lunches completely absent. Marcus tried to make conversation to lighten the mood, but even his natural charisma couldn't overcome the weight pressing down on all of us. Sierra kept shooting me concerned looks and Jamal seemed unsure what to say or do. When the bell rang, Madison caught my arm as I was leaving. "Can we talk, please?" I wanted to say no, wanted to put some distance between us until I figured out how to deal with all of this. But the look in her eyes, pleading and worried and genuinely distressed, made me nod. "After school," I said. "The parking lot." She nodded and hurried off to her next class. I made it through the afternoon on autopilot, not really absorbing anything my teachers said, just going through the motions until the final bell rang and I could escape. Madison was waiting by my car when I got there, leaning against it with her arms wrapped around herself despite the mild afternoon temperature. I unlocked the doors and we both got in, the privacy of the car offering a refuge from the watching eyes and whispered comments. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately. "I don't know how word got out about Thanksgiving, but I swear I didn't tell anyone except my closest friend from my old school, and she wouldn't have said anything to anyone here." "It doesn't matter how it got out," I said, staring straight ahead through the windshield. "The damage is done." "What damage? So what if people know we're friends?" "Who cares what they think?" I turned to look at her then, really look at her, and I saw in her face that she genuinely didn't understand. How could she? She'd never had to navigate the world the way I did, had never had to calculate the potential cost of every interaction, had never had to worry that associating with the wrong person might paint a target on her back. "Madison, I care what they think," I said, trying to keep my voice patient. "Because what they think affects my life in ways you can't understand. Tyler Morrison thinks I'm using you for money. Some of the black kids think I'm selling out. People are making assumptions about us, about our relationship, about my motives, and none of those assumptions are good. So what are you saying?" Her voice was small, almost fearful. "That we can't be friends anymore?" Was that what I was saying? I didn't know. Part of me wanted to cut ties, to retreat back into the safety of my old life where I knew the rules and understood my place. But another part of me, a part that was maybe stronger or maybe just more stubborn, refused to let other people's prejudices dictate my choices. "I'm saying we need to be careful," I finally said. "We need to think about how things look, about how we present ourselves. Because like it or not, people are watching and they're looking for reasons to tear us down." She was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I hate that you have to think this way. I hate that the world is like this." "Hating it doesn't change it," I said with a shrug. "It just is what it is. But it shouldn't be." "No," I agreed. "It shouldn't be, but we don't get to live in the world as it should be. We have to live in the world as it is." We sat there in silence for a while, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Madison spoke again, her voice determined. I don't want to lose you as a friend, Darius. You've become really important to me these past couple of months. You're real and honest, and you don't treat me like I'm some delicate flower or some prize to be won. You just treat me like a person. Do you know how rare that is? I did know, actually. I knew what it was like to be reduced to a category, to be seen as representative of a group rather than as an individual. We came from completely different circumstances, but in some ways we understood each other's isolation. I don't want to lose you either, I admitted. But I also don't know how to navigate this. How to be your friend without it becoming this huge thing that everyone has an opinion about. Then maybe we just don't worry about everyone else's opinions, she suggested. Maybe we just decide that we're friends, period, and anyone who has a problem with that can deal with it themselves. It sounded so simple when she said it like that, so straightforward, but I knew it wouldn't be, knew that taking that stance would have consequences, some of which I could anticipate and others that would blindside me. Still, what was the alternative? Living in fear, letting other people's prejudices dictate my life. Okay, I said finally, we're friends no matter what anyone else thinks. She smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her all day. Friends. We shook hands solemnly, like we were sealing a pact, and maybe we were. A pact to stand together against the judgment and the assumptions and the casual cruelty that people seemed so ready to inflict. It felt significant, that handshake, like we were choosing a harder path but maybe a more important one. The rest of November passed in a strange tension. The rumors about me and Madison didn't die down so much as shift and evolve. Some people decided we must be dating, despite our repeated insistence that we were just friends. Others concluded I was indeed using her somehow, though for what purpose no one could quite articulate. A few seemed to accept that we were genuinely just friends who happened to come from different backgrounds, but those people were in the minority. Tyler Morrison and his friends ramped up their harassment. Nothing overt enough to get them in trouble, but a constant drip of snide comments and hostile looks that wore on my nerves. The black students who'd initially seemed accepting of Madison now viewed our friendship with suspicion, like I'd crossed some invisible line. Even some of my teachers seemed to look at me differently, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what had changed. Through it all, Madison and I maintained our friendship. We still sat together at lunch, still had our Saturday tutoring sessions, still talked and joked and existed in each other's lives despite the cost. And it was a cost, I could feel it, could see it in the way people treated me, in the opportunities that seemed to quietly close off, in the general sense that I was being watched and judged more harshly than before. But there were also unexpected benefits. Mr. Henderson, who'd been observing everything with his characteristically silent assessment, gave me a raise out of nowhere, bumping my hourly wage up by $2 with no explanation beyond a gruff, "You're doing good work. This is what good work earns." Mrs. Patterson pulled me aside after English class one day and told me she'd written me a letter of recommendation for college applications, unprompted and generous in its praise. Sierra told me she thought I was brave for not backing down, for refusing to let other people's narrow-mindedness determine my choices. These moments of support meant more than I could express, small lights in what sometimes felt like overwhelming darkness. December arrived with a cold snap that was unusual for Georgia, frost on the ground in the mornings, and a chill in the air that made me grateful for the second-hand coat Mama had bought me from the thrift store. Christmas was approaching, and with it came all the financial stress that the holiday season always brought to households like ours. Mama was working herself ragged trying to save up enough for presents and a decent Christmas dinner, and I was contributing what I could from my hardware store wages and tutoring money, but it never felt like quite enough. It was the second Saturday in December, during our regular tutoring session at the library, when Madison brought up Christmas. "So what are your plans for the holidays?" she asked, looking up from the calculus problem she'd been working on. Not much, I said honestly. Mama and I usually just do a quiet day at home, maybe go to church if she's not too tired, nothing fancy. Madison nodded, her expression thoughtful. My dad's having another party on Christmas Eve, bigger than Thanksgiving. He wanted me to invite you. I looked at her in surprise. Your dad wanted you to invite me. Well, she amended, he said I could invite a few friends, and you're my friend, so yes, technically he wanted me to invite you. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner, about Richard Whitmore's pointed questions and assessing gaze. The idea of going through that again, especially during an even bigger event, made my stomach clench. I don't know, Madison, after Thanksgiving. I know, she interrupted. I know it was uncomfortable, but maybe it could be different this time. You'd know what to expect. And I really would like you there. I wanted to say no. Every instinct told me to politely decline, to keep that boundary between our worlds clearly delineated. But there was something in her eyes, some vulnerability or hope, that made me hesitate. Can I think about it? I asked, buying myself time. Of course, she said, but I could see the disappointment in her expression even as she tried to hide it. We returned to calculus, but my heart wasn't in it anymore, my mind spinning with questions and doubts and the ever-present weight of choices that seemed to matter more than they should. I didn't make a decision about the Christmas party right away. Instead, I let the question sit with me, turning it over in my mind during my shifts at the hardware store, during quiet moments at school, during the long walks home when the winter air bit at my exposed skin and made me huddle deeper into my coat. Mama noticed my preoccupation and asked about it one evening, and I found myself telling her everything about Madison's invitation and my conflicted feelings and the way I couldn't seem to figure out what the right choice was. She listened with her characteristic patience, letting me talk myself out before offering her perspective. Seems to me, she finally said, that you're worried about the wrong things. What do you mean? You're worried about what other people will think, about how you'll be perceived, about whether you belong in that world. Those are real concerns, baby. I'm not saying they're not, but they're not the most important concerns. Then what is? Whether you want to go, whether spending time with Madison at this party would make you happy, would add something positive to your life. Everything else is noise. It was such a simple reframing, cutting through all my anxiety and getting to the core question: did I want to go? When I stripped away all the other considerations, all the social calculations and worried what-ifs, what was left? The truth was, I did want to go. Not because of the mansion or the expensive food or the chance to see how rich people celebrated Christmas, but because Madison had asked me, because she wanted me there, because our friendship had come to mean something to me that I valued enough to fight for despite the cost. I think I do want to go, I admitted to Mama. She smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Then go, hold your head high, be yourself, and don't let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve to be there. You're just as worthy of respect and kindness as anyone else in that house, you hear me? Yes, ma'am. And Darius, I'm proud of you. Proud of the man you're becoming, proud of the choices you're making even when they're hard. Your grandmother would be proud too. I texted Madison that night to tell her I'd come to the Christmas party. Her response was immediate and enthusiastic, full of exclamation points and smiley faces that made me laugh despite myself. We made plans for the details, and then I set my phone aside and tried not to second-guess my decision. The weeks leading up to Christmas were busy at school with final exams and at work with customers stocking up on supplies for holiday projects. I threw myself into both, grateful for the distraction from the ongoing social drama that continued to swirl around me and Madison. Our friendship had become normalized to some degree. People were no longer quite as shocked to see us together, but that didn't mean the whispers had stopped or the judgments had ceased. They'd just become background noise, a constant hum that I'd learned to mostly tune out. Madison's calculus grades had improved dramatically. She'd gotten a B+ on her last test and was on track to finish the semester with a solid B overall. a huge improvement from where she'd started. She was proud of this achievement, and so was I, feeling like our tutoring sessions had accomplished something concrete and measurable. One Saturday afternoon in mid-December, after we'd finished our tutoring session, Madison hesitated like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to start. I'd learned to recognize that expression by now. "What's up?" I prompted. "I was wondering something," she said slowly. "And you can totally say no, this might be completely inappropriate or weird, but I wanted to ask anyway." "Okay," I said warily. "What are you getting your mom for Christmas?" The question caught me off guard. "I haven't really decided yet, probably nothing too expensive, money's tight as always." She nodded like she'd expected that answer. "What if we went shopping together? I need to get some presents anyway, and I thought maybe I could help you find something nice for your mom, my treat." Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. "Madison, I can't let you buy my mama a Christmas present." "Why not?" "Because it's not appropriate, because we're not. I mean, you're my friend, but buying presents for my family crosses a line." "What line?" she challenged. "The imaginary line that says rich people and poor people can't help each other. The line that says accepting kindness is somehow shameful." "It's not about shame," I tried to explain. "It's about maintaining boundaries, about not being charity." Her expression softened. "You're not charity, Darius, you're my friend. Friends help each other. You've helped me so much these past few months with calculus and with navigating a new school and just being someone I can talk to and be real with. Let me help you back, please." I wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain that wall of pride that said I didn't need anyone's help, that I could take care of myself and my mama just fine. But I could also hear Mama's voice reminding me that accepting help wasn't weakness, that community and interdependence were strengths, not flaws. "Nothing too expensive," I finally said. "Okay." Her smile was radiant. "Okay." So that's how I found myself spending a Saturday afternoon at the Millbrook Mall, which was really just a small collection of stores anchored by a department store on each end, walking beside Madison as she led me from shop to shop with determination. She asked questions about my mama, what she liked, what she needed, what would make her feel special and appreciated. And slowly, with Madison's help and enthusiasm, I found gifts that felt perfect. A soft cardigan in my mama's favorite color. A devotional book from an author she loved. Some fancy hand cream that Madison insisted every hardworking woman deserved. True to her word, Madison kept the gifts reasonably priced, nothing so expensive that it would make me uncomfortable or make my mama feel awkward about accepting them. But they were thoughtful, chosen with care, wrapped beautifully by the store employees who seemed charmed by Madison's friendly demeanor. When we were done, laden with shopping bags, Madison suggested we get coffee at the small cafe in the mall. We sat at a corner table, sipping drinks that were too sweet and too expensive but somehow perfect for the moment. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. "Not just for the gifts, but for doing this with me, for making it fun instead of stressful." "Thank you for letting me," she replied. "I know it wasn't easy for you to accept help, but I'm glad you did." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the other shoppers hurry past with their own bags and lists and holiday stress. "Can I ask you something?" I said, and she nodded. "Why Millbrook, really? There has to be a story there, some reason you left your fancy private school and your friends and your whole life to come to a small town in Georgia." She was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup like it held answers. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "My mom died," she said simply. "Last year, cancer. It was fast, or at least it felt fast. One day she was fine, the next she was sick, and then 6 months later she was gone." "Madison, I'm so sorry," I said, feeling terrible for bringing up something so painful. "It's okay, I mean it's not okay, but I'm learning to live with it. Anyway, after she died, everything felt wrong. The house we'd lived in, the school I went to, the friends I had, all of it felt tainted somehow, like reminders of what I'd lost. And my dad, he was grieving too, but in this quiet, controlled way that made it impossible to connect with him. He just threw himself into work, spent more and more time at the office, and when he was home, he was distant and unavailable. She took a shaky breath before continuing. I started acting out, I guess. Nothing terrible, but drinking at parties, staying out late, hanging with kids who weren't good for me. My grades started slipping. I was just so angry all the time, angry at the world and at my dad and at my mom for leaving and at myself for not being able to hold it together. And then I got caught with alcohol at school and the administration said they were going to expel me unless I got help. So your dad sent you here? Not quite. He found this therapist and we started doing family therapy together, actually talking for the first time since Mom died. And one of the things that came out was that I needed a fresh start, somewhere without all the memories and expectations and social pressures. My dad has business connections in Georgia, had been thinking about opening a satellite office here, so we made a deal. I'd come to Millbrook for my senior year, live with him in the house he bought here, go to public school and try to have a normal teenage experience. Get my grades up, stay out of trouble, prove I could handle responsibility. And if I did all that, he'd let me choose my own college without interference. It all made sense now. The move, the choice to attend Millbrook High instead of another private school, the way she seemed both eager to fit in and slightly lost in how to do it. That's a lot to deal with, I said, losing your mom and moving and starting over all at once. Yeah, she agreed. It has been, but honestly, coming here has been good for me in ways I didn't expect. Meeting you and Marcus and Sierra and Jamal, having real friends who like me for me and not for my dad's money or my last name. It's been healing, I think, a different kind of therapy. I'm glad we could help, I said, even if it's been complicated sometimes. The best things usually are, she said with a small smile. We finished our coffee and gathered our bags, heading out into the cold afternoon. Madison drove me home, and as I got out of the car with my shopping bags full of gifts I could never have afforded on my own, I felt overwhelmed by gratitude and something deeper, a sense of connection that transcended our different circumstances. Christmas Eve arrived with temperatures cold enough that there was talk of possible snow, though in Georgia that was usually just wishful thinking. The party was scheduled to start at 6, and I spent the afternoon getting ready, showering and putting on my dress clothes that Mama had insisted on ironing again despite my protests that they were fine. She fussed over me like I was going to prom instead of a Christmas party, adjusting my collar and smoothing imaginary wrinkles. You look so handsome, she said, her eyes suspiciously bright. So grown up. Mama, I'm just going to a party. I know, baby, but watching you navigate all of this, the complications and the challenges and the growth, it makes me realize you're not my little boy anymore. You're becoming a man, a good man, and I'm so proud of who you are. I hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume and her shampoo and the lavender lotion she used. I love you, Mama. I love you too. Now go on before you're late. And remember everything I taught you about manners and respect and holding your head high. The drive to the Whitmore mansion felt different this time, less terrifying and more familiar. I'd been here before, I knew what to expect, and that knowledge helped calm my nerves. The house was even more impressive at night, lit up with thousands of white lights that made it look like something from a fairy tale. The driveway was lined with luminarias, and Christmas music drifted out from inside, elegant classical arrangements that spoke of tradition and wealth. Charles answered the door again, greeting me with that same warm smile. Mr. Thompson, welcome back. Miss Madison will be delighted you're here. The house was packed with people, easily twice as many as Thanksgiving, all dressed in their holiday finest and holding champagne flutes and spreading cheer with practiced ease. I spotted Madison almost immediately, standing near the Christmas tree that had to be at least 15 feet tall and decorated with what looked like antique ornaments and gold ribbons. She saw me at the same time and excused herself from the group she'd been talking to, making her way over with a genuine smile. "You came," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I said I would. I know, but after Thanksgiving I wasn't sure. Anyway, I'm glad you're here. Come on, let me introduce you to some people." The evening was easier than Thanksgiving had been, maybe because I knew what to expect or maybe because I'd grown more comfortable in my own skin. I talked to bankers and lawyers and business owners, answered their polite questions with polite answers, and tried to see them as individuals rather than as representatives of a class that had historically oppressed people like me. Some of them were genuinely kind, interested in my plans and my work and my perspective. Others were doing the Southern politeness thing, courteous on the surface but with an undertone of condescension that I'd learned to recognize and ignore. Richard Whitmore sought me out about an hour into the party, finding me near the refreshment table where I was sampling fancy appetizers whose names I couldn't pronounce. "Darius," he said, his tone neutral. "I'm glad you could make it. Thank you for having me, sir." He studied me for a moment, and I met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away first. Finally, he spoke. "Madison tells me you've been a tremendous help to her this semester. Her calculus grade has improved significantly." "She's a hard worker," I said. "She just needed someone to explain the concepts in a way that made sense to her." "Modest," Richard observed. "You were modest at Thanksgiving, too. It's a good quality, though I wonder if sometimes it holds you back." I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I said nothing. "I did some research on you after Thanksgiving," he continued, and my stomach dropped. "Talked to some people, checked into your background." This felt like a violation, an invasion of privacy, but I kept my expression carefully neutral. "And what did you find?" "That you're exactly who you appear to be. Good grades, good work ethic, no trouble with the law, respected by your teachers and your employer. Your mother is well regarded in the community, known for her hard work and integrity. You come from difficult circumstances, but you've made the most of your opportunities." "Thank you, sir," I said, though I wasn't sure if his assessment was a compliment or just a statement of fact. "I'll be honest with you, Darius. When Madison first mentioned you, I had concerns. The circumstances of your meeting, the differences in your backgrounds, the potential for complications or misunderstandings. I wanted to protect my daughter. I understand, sir, any father would feel the same. But what I've observed these past few weeks, the way Madison talks about you, the positive influence you've had on her academics and her attitude, and what I learned from my research, all of it suggests that my initial concerns were unfounded. You're a good kid, Darius, and you've been a good friend to my daughter during a difficult time in her life." I felt something loosening in my chest, some tension I'd been carrying since Thanksgiving finally releasing. "She's been a good friend to me too, sir." "I'm glad to hear it. True friendship, the kind that crosses social boundaries and persists despite obstacles, that's rare and valuable. I hope you both appreciate what you have." "I do, sir." He nodded, then did something that surprised me. He extended his hand, and when I shook it, his grip was firm and his expression was genuinely warm. "Merry Christmas, Darius." "Merry Christmas, sir." He moved away to greet other guests, leaving me standing there trying to process what had just happened. I think I just received Richard Whitmore's blessing, his approval of my friendship with his daughter. It shouldn't have mattered so much what one man thought, but it did. It mattered because it removed a source of tension, because it validated something I'd been feeling but hadn't quite believed in. The rest of the party passed in a blur of conversation and laughter and the warm glow of acceptance. When it was time to leave, Madison walked me out to my car like she had at Thanksgiving. "My dad talked to you," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Yeah, what did he say?" "That he approves of our friendship, that he thinks I'm a good kid and I've been good for you." She smiled, a radiant expression that lit up the night. "I told you he'd come around. He just needed time to see what I see." "And what do you see?" I asked, genuinely curious. She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I see someone who's kind without expecting anything in return, someone who's smart and capable but doesn't need to prove it, someone who treats me like a person instead of an opportunity or a prize. I see a real friend, Darius, maybe the most real friend I've ever had. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just hugged her, and we stood there in the cold December night, two people from completely different worlds who'd somehow found common ground. Merry Christmas, Madison. Merry Christmas, Darius. I drove home with my heart full, and when I got there, Mama was still up, waiting like she always did. I told her everything about the party and the conversation with Richard, and the way Madison had looked at me with such genuine friendship. Mama listened and smiled and told me she was proud, and then we spent Christmas Eve the way we always did, just the two of us, sharing hot chocolate and watching old Christmas movies until we both fell asleep on the couch. Christmas morning, I gave Mama the gifts Madison had helped me choose. Her reaction was everything I'd hoped for, tears of joy and surprise and that special happiness that comes from feeling seen and appreciated. She gave me gifts too, things she'd saved for and hidden away, a new jacket and some books I'd mentioned wanting and a card with words that made my own eyes sting with tears. The rest of Christmas break passed peacefully. School started again in January, bringing with it a new semester and new possibilities. Madison and I continued our friendship, and while we still got looks and comments, they felt less hostile now, more curious than judgmental. Word had apparently got around about Richard Whitmore's approval, and in a town like Millbrook where social hierarchies mattered, that approval carried weight. Tyler Morrison and his friends backed off, finding other targets for their cruelty. The black students who'd been suspicious gradually came around, some of them even approaching Madison to get to know her better. Our lunch table expanded, more people joining our group, drawn by the example we'd set of friendship that transcended social boundaries. Spring arrived with its usual explosion of color and warmth. College acceptance letters started arriving, and I was thrilled to get into a good technical school with a partial scholarship that made it actually affordable. Madison got into every school she applied to, ultimately choosing a university in California where she could study marine biology, a passion I'd learned about during our many hours of tutoring and talking. Graduation approached with all its bittersweet nostalgia. On one of our last tutoring sessions, which had evolved into just hangout sessions since Madison no longer needed help with math, she brought up something that had been on my mind too. "We're going to stay friends, right?" she asked. "After graduation, when we're in different states, living different lives." "Of course," I said immediately. "Friends don't stop being friends just because of distance. Promise, promise." We made plans to visit each other, to video chat regularly, to not let our friendship fade the way so many high school friendships did. And I believed we'd keep those promises because what we'd built was too valuable to let slip away. Graduation day was beautiful, sunny, and warm with a breeze that kept it from being too hot. I walked across that stage to receive my diploma with my head high and my heart full, seeing Mama in the audience crying tears of pride and knowing that I'd made her proud, that I'd overcome obstacles and exceeded expectations and proven that circumstances of birth didn't determine destiny. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photos and celebrations, Madison found me and pulled me into a hug. "We did it," she said. "We did. Thank you, Darius, for everything. For being my friend when I needed one, for helping me find myself in this place, for showing me that authenticity and kindness matter more than money or status." "Thank you too," I said, "for seeing past the surface stuff, for treating me like an equal when you didn't have to, for teaching me that people from different worlds can still find common ground." We stood there in our caps and gowns, two friends who'd started as strangers from completely different circumstances. And I realized that our story wasn't about a rich girl and a poor boy or about white and black or about any of the labels people had tried to assign us. It was about two human beings who'd chosen to see each other's humanity, who'd refused to let society's divisions dictate their relationship, who'd built something real and lasting despite every obstacle. As summer arrived and we prepared to go our separate ways, I thought about how much had changed since that day on Highway 41 when I'd stopped to help a girl with a broken-down car. How that simple act of kindness had rippled outward, changing both our lives in ways I could never have predicted. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe Madison and I would stay close, or maybe life would pull us in different directions, and our friendship would become a fond memory. But I knew that this experience had changed me, had taught me lessons I'd carry forward into whatever came next. I'd learned that kindness matters, even when it's inconvenient or complicated. I'd learned that real friendship can transcend social boundaries if both people are willing to fight for it. I'd learned that prejudice and judgment say more about the people doing the judging than the people being judged. I'd learned that accepting help isn't weakness and that offering help isn't charity, but both are expressions of our shared humanity. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was enough, just as I was right where I came from with all my limitations and circumstances. I was enough. I deserved friendship and respect and opportunity just as much as anyone else, regardless of the size of my bank account or the color of my skin. The day I left for technical school, Mama drove me to the bus station because our car wouldn't make the 6-hour trip. Madison met us there, insisting on saying goodbye in person. She gave me a gift, a leather journal with my initials embossed on the cover. "For writing down all your adventures," she said, "so you can remember where you came from and how far you've gone." I hugged her one last time, this friend who changed my life, and then I got on that bus and watched through the window as she and Mama stood together, waving, getting smaller and smaller as the bus pulled away from Millbrook. I opened the journal and found an inscription on the first page in Madison's careful handwriting. "Thank you for stopping that day on the highway. Thank you for seeing me when others only saw my last name. Thank you for teaching me what real friendship looks like. You're going to do amazing things, Darius Thompson. The world is lucky to have you in it. Love, Madison." I read those words over and over as the Georgia countryside rolled past outside the window, and I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Not just the physical journey from Millbrook to my new school, but the emotional and spiritual journey from that scared, uncertain boy to who I was now, someone who'd learned to stand tall in any circumstance, to value himself regardless of others' judgments, to believe in his own worth and potential. The future was uncertain, full of challenges and obstacles I couldn't yet see, but I was ready for it. Ready to prove that hard work and determination and integrity mattered more than background or privilege. Ready to make my mama proud, to honor my grandmother's legacy, to become the man I was meant to be. And somewhere in California, starting her own journey, was a friend who believed in me. A friend who'd seen past the surface to the person underneath. A friend who taught me that sometimes the most important connections happen when we least expect them, when we choose kindness over caution, when we open ourselves to possibilities beyond our own limited experience. I thought about that day on the highway, about the choice I'd made to stop and help instead of walking past. Such a simple decision made in a moment, but with ripples that extended far beyond what I could have imagined. It reminded me that every choice matters, every interaction has the potential to change lives, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply show up for each other with open hearts and willing hands. Years from now, I knew I'd look back on my senior year and smile, remembering the girl with the broken down Mercedes and the friendship that grew from that chance encounter. I'd remember the lessons learned and the obstacles overcome, and the moments of grace that carried me through the hard times. But most of all, I'd remember that I'd been true to myself, that I'd refused to let others' limitations become my own, that I'd chosen authenticity over acceptance and integrity over ease. And in the end, that was all anyone could really ask for: to live honestly, to treat others with kindness, to believe in the possibility of connection across all the artificial divides we create. The bus carried me toward my future, and I went willingly, gratefully, hopefully. Because I'd learned that wherever I went, whatever I did, I carried with me the most important thing of all: the knowledge that I was worthy of love and respect and opportunity, not because of what I had but because of who I was. And that was a gift more valuable than any amount of money, any mansion, any privilege. It was the gift of self-worth, hard won and deeply earned, and it was mine to keep forever. The story of the black boy who helped a billionaire's daughter wasn't really about wealth or race or social class at all. It was about two people choosing to see each other's humanity. It was about kindness creating unexpected connections. It was about the revolutionary act of authentic friendship in a world designed to keep people separated. And it was about understanding that sometimes the greatest riches aren't found in bank accounts or mansions or expensive cars, but in the hearts of people brave enough to reach across divides and say, "I see you, you matter, let's be friends." That was the real treasure I'd found that day on Highway 41. Not money or status or access to a different world, but something far more valuable: a friendship that reminded me of my own worth and a belief in the possibility of genuine human connection. And as the bus carried me toward new horizons, I held that treasure close to my heart, knowing it would sustain me through whatever challenges lay ahead. Because I wasn't just Darius Thompson from the poor side of Millbrook anymore. I was Darius Thompson who'd learned to stand tall, who'd found his voice, who'd discovered that his story mattered just as much as anyone else's. And that was a truth worth holding onto: yesterday, today, and forever.